session of the Newbury Selectboard for Monday, November 15th, 2021, and it's currently 7:10 p.m. This meeting is being broadcast on local cable TV and recorded for rebroadcast on local cable channels and on the internet. The meeting is also accessible by remote participation. The instructions through Zoom, if dial 646-558-8656, use the meeting ID of 842-2027-5613 and passcode of 050263, or use that same meeting ID and passcode to come in on the internet. There's a regional vaccination clinics scheduled for ages 5 through 11. So this is the kids clinics. There's one tonight or today. Tonight, I'm not sure if it's still going on or not. That may be how long it runs today. It was going on when I arrived here. The hours. Well, in any event, there's one today on the 15th. There's additional clinics on the 22nd and the 29th. And you can see details on the town website. There's a Community Preservation Committee public informational hearing scheduled for Thursday, November 18th at 8 p.m. in this room, the first floor hearing room. It's to solicit input from citizens regarding the needs, possibilities, and resources of the town relative to the Community Preservation Act in the areas of community housing, historic preservation, open space and recreation regarding development of the Community Preservation Plan. That's an open public meeting for anybody who would like to, actually it's an open public hearing for anyone who would like to listen in and participate in the discussion regarding the CPC and use of our funds. And as always, there's a call for volunteers for a number of committees. This is an opportunity for anybody who wants to contribute to the community. They're in alphabetical order: the Climate Change Resiliency Committee, the Community Preservation Committee, the Conservation Commission, the Council on Aging, the Cultural Council, the Finance Committee, the GAR Memorial Library Board of Trustees, the Historic District Commission, Historical Commission, Mill Pond Committee, Tree Committee, and Zoning Board of Appeals. It's got to be close to half of all committees in town have at least one opening on them, and it is an opportunity to contribute. So anybody who hears that, think about it, please. You can subscribe to the town news and announcements on the town website, which is westnewbury.org, /subscribe. And that will allow you to get on the email list for various boards and committees and general announcements by the town. Just want to mention sort of I guess this is a remembrance of two people who have died in the last week and a half who contributed substantially to the committee or to the community over the course of the last several decades. Kay Gove was library director for over 40 years. She died about a week and a half ago. She was an iconic at the library. And
working way many hours.
Exactly, working tirelessly and endlessly, it seemed. That's sad because she was a real contributor for a long period of time. Also, about a week and a half ago, Chuck Quartermarsh who was a police sergeant here. He sort of worked his way up to the ranks. He also contributed in various other ways in the town. I think he was on the Board of Water Commissioners for a while. For several years. I actually don't recall what other committees or boards he might have participated in, but but he was very, very active in the community for a long time, and he was on the police force for I don't know how long, 30 years maybe. Jeff, do you have more than that? I guess we also acknowledge his passing and the contributions that he made to the community. So. I can't help but repeat myself. Under regular business, the first item is police department staffing updates. And Jeff, would you like to speak up?
Sure, I'd just like to take a minute and publicly announce to the select board and the town manager of my intentions to retire as police chief effective June 30th of 2022. My time working in Westonbury has been very fulfilling to me. I've had a great career. It's time to move on to the next chapter. So I will be leaving end of June.
So you'll be missed, Jeff. And
Thank you.
I just want to say thanks for giving us as much of a heads up as you have, because obviously, you got to find somebody to fill your shoes, and
That would be easy.
it's not going to be easy, right?
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Hopefully you have a great time as you move south. I'm
I hope so, too.
sure you won't be missing shoveling snow.
No, one moment there. If I do, I appreciate everything that Tom's done for me. Been here since 1995. Like I said, it's been a great career, a great town to do police work, and I appreciate everybody.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything you've done.
Thank you.
Very nice, Jeff. Thanks. Okay, we have two applications for committee appointments. And the first is Carly Ramos for the Cultural Council. Hi, Carly.
Hi, it's nice to meet you.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for throwing your hat in the ring.
Sure.
How was your trip to Mexico?
It's great.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking.
Where in Mexico did you go?
I went to Mexico City.
Okay.
They do like a big Day of the Dead
Yeah,
celebration
right,
there. So
right,
it's
yeah.
just a cool thing
Yeah, right.
to experience.
Yeah. So, yeah, we all read your application, and I think you're as qualified, ultimately you're as qualified as anybody. And I don't have any particular questions, personally. I think it's great that you want to participate and, contribute to the community. So,
Definitely. I'm excited.
this is a good place to get started. That's a good place to get started.
Thank you.
Get the fun part, you get to give away money.
We have to raise it.
Sure. Anything that I need to do, be aware of the front, or anything you guys are looking for? Somebody to sort of bring to the positions?
I don't specifically. I know a couple of people on the cultural council, and I'm sure they'll be great to work with. I guess I would move that we appoint Carly to the cultural council.
Second.
For a term, I think it's appointed annually for a cultural council. So that would be.
I actually think it's more.
Oh, is it?
Doesn't it?
I think it is longer. I think it's 3-year terms, and I think you can serve up to 2 3-year terms. It's the only committee or commission where there's actual term limits per
Okay.
statute. So it's up to 2 3-year terms.
Okay.
I think it's 3.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. So will that be the case? We generally do appointments at the beginning of the fiscal year. your appointment would be then effective through June 30th, 2024,
Okay.
which is not going to be quite 3 years, it'll be 2.5 plus. So,
I'll be back.
great.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So the next step, congratulations.
Thank
So you'd be hearing from the town clerk's office regarding the process to get sworn in.
Okay, wonderful.
And you'd be given a copy of the open meeting law and the state ethics, and you have a certain amount of time. And Jim's office will go through all of that, that you need to take you sign acknowledgement of receipt of the open meeting law and take the state ethics training, and you can download a certificate, and they keep a file of all of those.
Okay.
But it's a great group. One thing that we've done, we try to do a good job, better job in the last, 6 to 12 months is if the cultural council is sponsoring a activity that we want to make sure that we get the word out locally. So all of the chairs have been great to work with. They send us the information. We put it out through the town social media and website, and hopefully so that local residents get as much value as possible out of the events. So.
I actually think I have the ethics training because I subbed at Stormwater.
Okay.
Is that the same thing I would have done for that?
I would think so, but Jim and Christine.
Okay,
can-
when you reach out to me, I'll send you that.
Good.
Thank you guys so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
have a good night. Let me see. Who's this? Patricia. So yeah, Patricia Reeser has applied to become a member of the CPC in that large seat. So how are you doing, Patricia?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Did you have any questions?
Kind of all know you already. So,
I
Yeah, so-
just have a comment. I think this would be a strong addition to the CPC because she would represent the open space committee
Yeah.
membership, which is not currently represented.
okay. Although are you still on the OSD, or I think you were contemplating at one point?
No, I'm still on. the
Okay,
open
great, good, okay. I know you're no longer on the other, the CCRC.
Space. Well, I was going to
There's lots of
officially,
acronyms.
I was going to officially tender my resignation for climate resilience tonight, since I think Marlon's indicated she wants to. stay.
Right, that's great, good. Yeah, thanks for finding a replacement. Yeah, I guess, you know how it all works, and the committee, I mean, the CPC, so you don't need any explanation from us.
I kind of know how it works.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
representing OSC on it, because I think we talked maybe 2 years ago about maybe changing the bylaw and making it a permanent position. And in the interim, making it a large position in OSC seat.
Okay,
Be great to
so we
try
get,
that.
this is a twofer then.
Yeah.
At large from the open space committee. Good, all right, great. So and is this CPC, I think is annual. I'll be careful.
I actually think it is a 3-year appointment because the seat that you'll be occupying was recently vacated when Sherry Pruitt stepped down. I don't remember Sherry being appointed the last couple of cycles. So I think it's a 3-year appointment.
So,
Only the committee ones are.
Correct. Yeah, the designation of the planning board or Concom and so forth
Okay.
is annual.
okay, so, that being the case, was Sherry then in the last year of I guess at what point? What was the decision cycle? Exactly. yeah,
I think
that
that's
was-
right. I think that would be right. Yeah. So let me see what we can find out here. Okay, yeah, so Sherry's term would have been through FY22, so through the end of June of this fiscal year,
Okay,
and then you can seek reappointment. So,
okay,
but I think that's right, that it would fill out the remainder of Sherry's term.
okay, so, move we appoint Patricia Reeser to the CPC as an at-large member through, June 30th, 2022.
Aye.
Thank you.
It is a great time to be joining. As you know, they're meeting this Thursday is their annual hearing. And, I think that's going to be a really good meeting. And there's a lot of active projects and a lot of other projects on the horizon. So I think it's great. Yeah, that's terrific.
I just wanted to say for anybody that's listening that volunteering for one of the committee seats that are open, it's kind of appalling so many are open until actually. I
Yeah.
think it's kind of unusual. But it's a great way to get to know people who live here and get to know how the town works and get recommended enough to anybody who has the time. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Good night. Okay, so next we have FY 22 tax classification hearing with the Board of Assessors and their chief assessor. Hi, Christian.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good.
So every year, it is mandated by the state that the select board or town or city council vote to approve a proration of taxes between the different property classes. West Newbury has historically had a single rate, but we do have the option of having a split rate as well. That's the purpose why we're here. I want to go behind the numbers a little bit before getting to there. The past year has seen unprecedented growth in the real estate market, which has led to a large jump in valuations across the board. 3% has been the typical town growth year over year for the past 10 years. This past year, in FY 22, we saw an increase of 14.75. And so I can't stress enough how much the valuations have gone up in that time. We've also had
How does that compare to Newbury or just North Shore, all is the same?
Yes. Looking at the towns that are certified already, most have been in the low to mid-teens as far as valuation increase. So we're a little bit higher amongst them, but still not out of proportion. It should be noted too that the personal property valuation for the town went up significantly this year. That was due to a new valuation method for the utilities being done. Previously, assessors would receive what the utility companies thought the value of their personal property was in the town. And that was what we used as the valuation. And now it's a mix between that and then also some independent valuation that we had done by an outside source.
So essentially the previous values were based on the utilities fully depreciated value of their assets.
Correct.
And now there's some connection with the productive value of the assets.
Correct, and how they contribute to a sale of property, because it was a long time where there weren't any sales of the utility companies in Massachusetts. And in the past 12 years, I think there have been 2. So they've been able to tease that out a little bit of how much to value these things.
So does this
Was
refer like to the right of way? I mean, what does this refer to specifically with property?
This is light posts, transmission wires, gas lines, not the right of ways. Those are valued as real estate and not personal property. I'm trying to think what else would fall under that category. Transmission, distribution, anything that would fall under that.
Was this the special article that we paid for the consultants and stuff, so it paid off.
Yes.
Christian,
I,
roughly, what was the rough increase in value from previous?
for the utilities alone, I think it was about 2.5 million
Whoa.
in property value.
Yeah.
So it was significant. Which increased our new growth number from over the average from where it was. Typically, we would see. Where did I have this? Looking at a typical number here. But if I think we saw about 13 million has been about typical amount past 10 years, and we saw 16 million in new growth this year. So that's new growth to the tax base that effectively lowers the tax levy that the town distributes.
Yeah, so the delta between the typical and this year is almost entirely attributable to the utility.
Yes.
change. Okay.
So we'll get 35 grand approximately from that, but continuing, not just 1 year, so.
Right.
Does it get to be subsequently depreciated again? I assume it will.
Yes.
You start out with 2.5 million, then down to each year for a while.
Right, but utilities typically tend to replace their assets just because then they have a lifespan on those things that need to be kept up. So out of the personal property accounts, utilities at least have some growth each year, just because they're always doing something. So that's a little bit of background about where as far as valuation. Once properties are certified and valuations are certified, which they were November 1st by the DOR, the select board needs to schedule a hearing, that's tonight, which to vote on either a single rate or a mixed rate to distribute the tax burden between the classes. There is a maximum shift of taxes between residential and open space to commercial, industrial, and personal property, and that's by 50%. So the commercial, industrial, personal property would be paying as a group 150% of their original taxes. If they were to do that swing all the way that way, the discount for residential would only be 1.5% decrease in their overall taxes that they need to pay. So as my opinion and the Board of Assessors has voted to suggest a single rate.
Which is what has historically been done. So I guess.
So could I, what is the split between commercial, industrial property and residential? Is it, I know it was in here.
So the split can be up to 150%.
I think you're at, in terms of valuation.
Let me look at
97.5%.
Yeah, I know, it's pretty.
It's on,
I gotta look that up.
it's in here, it's on page 14. It's in the top left.
97%.
Yeah, so commercial is, you know, what,
So that's
0.8%, 0.87% of the total value in town. So you get if you had a split tax rate, you would have a very, very modest impact on the residential rate, but you would just crush those small number of businesses that we do have.
Be placing a large burden on business properties. In larger municipalities or those with a large commercial base, this might be beneficial for the town to consider. But here it would put a strong, heavy burden on commercial properties while only giving a small benefit to residential properties.
So, this is kind of anecdotal, but it's interesting that, so the value of all real estate in town is now this year or last year, the first time.
This is the first year.
Has exceeded
This is the
$1 billion.
first year. Yeah.
Yeah, and so whatever it's worth, we've now hit,
We're over that threshold.
10 to the 9.
Musk sold 5 West Newbury's in one day.
Yeah,
We just sold another one right there.
yeah, so that, without perspective, it's like a big deal, right?
Right.
Seems like a big deal. Okay, well, I would move that we would adopt a single tax rate.
Second, in all of these other.
And all the other suggestions.
I would add to that from the amendment, not recommend the open space discount, not recommend the residential exception, and not recommend the small commercial property exception.
Then appreciate it, thank you. Any other discussion?
Yeah, I have a question on the residential exemption. I mean, has the board, and do you have any experience with other types of approaches to exemptions, like some of the more aggressive taxation?
So we have the statutory ones that are available to us, such as veterans and the blind exemption and the low income senior exemptions. Those are all available to the community. These are specific, the exemptions that are being voted on at this meeting are more of a directive by the select board as to where they would like the tax policy to go. And fortunately, the choices here are good for some communities and not for others. The residential exemption offered here is great for communities that have lots of second homes or rental units, absentee landlords who don't live in the town, therefore would not get the exemption, but people who do live there, who send their kids to school, they would get the exemption, have the discount off their taxes. But as far as other exemptions that are available outside of what we currently offer, we offer about 95% of what the state would allow.
All in favor?
All right.
Christian, well, before you, so often, so the vote that you just took is the purpose of the hearing. So thank you for that. It's all, this hearing is also often thought of as when the tax rate is set. As I think you all know, it's not set locally, it's set as a function of the math that goes to the state. But we do always use this opportunity to estimate what we think the tax rate will be. And we do expect a significant reduction in the tax rate, which is what you would expect with such a large increase in valuation. If you're doing things, correctly, there would be an inverse relationship between values and tax rate because the taxes are raised over a larger pie of value. So, it won't be set until it's all certified by Department of Revenue, but we do expect the tax rate would drop to approximately 1306 this year. which would represent its lowest rate in more than a decade. So, and we've estimated that the actual tax bill of the typical household would fall by about a little over 2%. So this is on page 20 of the open session packet, which is posted on the town website from the select board page.
And I think that's actually a good point to emphasize, because despite the fact that sections have done an average of close to 15%, the net tax bill on average will actually go down slightly. And so, you know, people focus sometimes on the tax rate, but in fact, the tax rate is it's only half of the story. You know, the rest of the story is what the assessment of any particular property is. You know, both some tax rate per thousand. So I'm sure some people hear the assessments are going up and they begin to freak out, and then if they stop and think about it and apply a tax rate, then they realize that it's not not a bad thing.
And Christian, the little chart that you made on page 7 or whatever page is excellent, because for people listening, the valuations of all of the houses at the lower end of valuations, as well as the houses, the properties at the higher end of valuations, all of them are in the neighborhood of a slightly above 2% decrease in the estimated bill. So it's not it's across the board essentially. So that's very good.
I think the way I was trying to get at, talking about exemptions, is for, you know, homeowners with the 10th through 30th percentile, you know, that difference in amount makes a much bigger impact on their income. You know, so if it's the same across all income levels or all home value levels, sometimes people in the lower percentiles may feel that, you know, less than. I mean, there are some new progressive approaches to taxation that have been developed in some towns that, I don't know, I think it's interesting to look at. You know, I think the board can just, you know, or if you're familiar with it, you know, maybe think about that going forward.
Okay.
Because I know there are senior citizens who do have a hard time paying taxes. So.
Well, what is the rule about the CPA on the first 100,000?
It's exempted.
Yeah.
The first 100,000 of the value is exempted.
So if someone's house is say valued at say 250,000, so they would only be paying the CPA on 150, versus someone's house was valued at 750, they would be paying the CPA on a much higher percentage of their. So there are things in there already that do that.
Yeah, so, but I mean, some towns and cities are actually applying that same approach to the real estate taxes across the board, not just the CPA. I mean, some of them are large cities and some are, you know, fairly wealthy communities on the Cape, but it is something that's being, you know, and bits and pieces.
For the most part, every exemption that state law allows us to take, West Newbury takes, and we advertise it. And for the elderly, for the lower income, there are a lot of programs, and if anyone is hearing this, stop by the assessor's office and fill out an exemption form.
We did send out a publication earlier this year to all residents.
I recall seeing it. So Wendy, is there, you know, a program for the, you know, the exemption you're thinking of? Are they unique to those communities, or are they applying the elderly exemption?
No, they're unique. You actually have to get legislative approval.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So it would be above and beyond. You said 95% of what the state allows.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
So you have to get a home rule petition passed the legislature, is that what?
I'm not sure the mechanics of doing it, but I know that those towns and cities, there's I think 30 of them that have done that. and they have to get legislative.
I'll have to take a look.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it would be, yeah, because there are definitely, elderly people in town who are pressed by their tax bill, and if there was something we could do, it would be worth looking into to see if there's something we could do to make that less important.
Yes.
Something that I've never really fully understood is how excess levy is. How you determine that, how it carries forward. Is there an easy explanation? I don't want to speak it.
A layman's explanation.
Yeah, right.
There is not an easy explanation, but I can tell you that the Massachusetts DOR does have training information available online that does speak to excess levy and levy capacity and
Yeah.
levy ceiling and all those fun words.
Okay, that's on DOR.
Yes, there's a link on the assessor's webpage.
Okay.
That information is-
Oh, great, okay, good. I could use it, thanks. Great. Okay. Good, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thanks a lot.
board.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for the. What money's there? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so our next item is presentation of the FY 21 town audit by Roselli and Clark Associates, specifically Tony Roselli. Hi, Tony. You're muted.
Okay, I just wanted to unmute. Hey, how's everyone doing?
All right.
Great. Nice to be with you guys. If not in person, at least on the big screen.
Yeah.
So so you want me to jump right into the management letter? Is that the way to approach this?
Yeah, I think that'd be great if you could do that.
Okay, super. All right, so first of all, just a quick overview. The last few years have been particularly challenging with all the turnover and changing systems and accountants and finance director to town manager. So there's just been a lot of moving parts in the town of West Newbury. That's brought a lot of challenges to the financial and administrative offices. I'm happy to report that those seem to be under control at this point. So that's the biggest thing. This was a good audit, an efficient audit, and we were very pleased with that. And we'll get into some of the bigger improvements as we get through the report. But I just wanted to kind of put that out there that the last few years, like I said, have been a little bit of a lot of inefficiencies and getting things to reconcile and whatnot for obvious reasons. But it seems like the town offices, the financial and administrative offices have got the ship moving in the right direction. So so really happy to report that as my opening remark. So jumping right into the management letter on page 2, if you folks have it in front of you. Just want to look at some key financial highlights. First of all, a very challenging year due to COVID and social distancing and people getting COVID, employees getting COVID and being out. So the town survived really well. Financially, your unassigned fund balance was about the same as the year before at 5.4 million. Your OPEB assets increased to 2.9 million, and I'm going to get into some detail on that in a few minutes. But that increased to almost 2.9 million, so that's a very, very high level. In fact, the highest it's ever been. Stabilization funds increased to 3.4 million. And your unused levy capacity, I did hear a quick conversation about that just before I hopped on. I caught the tail end of it. But your unused levy capacity at the end of 21 was 1.1 million. So the town did a really nice job of managing the tax burden to the taxpayer by having unused levy capacity, but also providing adequate services and increasing your reserves. So you're walking that fine line very nicely. In a lot of places, we see reserves being plenished and services being provided, but the taxpayer is getting taxed right to the levy. So the taxpayer is, bearing a lot of that burden. Or the taxpayer is not bearing the burden, but you're not getting reserves and you're not getting, the adequate services. Here, you've kind of met a nice fine line that you're following, and you've been following for a few years now. So, so hopefully the next time you go through your bond ratings, that the rating agencies do recognize that and give you a, I know the town's looking for AAA. You're scoring that way. In the demographics and the different metrics that I'm seeing, whether it goes there or not, we don't know. But next time, I think you'll have a better shot at it than the last time. Secondly, the talk about just some of the improvements in the operations. The conversion of the new accounting software is done. This was really difficult because the prior accountant who started the conversion submitted her resignation halfway through the conversion. So it left a lot of loose ends, a lot of one-sided entries, a lot of things that the current town accountant had to really lose a lot of nights sleep over, just trying to get through and making balance. And happy to report that that's all done. I think Stephanie is now officially an expert in the software system. In fact, I think other towns are calling Stephanie up now to find out how to do different things. So she's become very proficient at it. And that was a great job, because it's not that simple coming halfway into a conversion and trying to fix it. The new treasurer was appointed midway through the year, and we'll get into that in a second on some of the improvements there, but that's been a significant improvement in the day-to-day operations and just getting things done. So a lot of good things happening. We can switch over to page 4. Anything on the overview? Questions I can take before we jump ahead? Okay, so we can get into a little bit more detail. Okay, so on OPEB, and I always like to talk about the big liabilities, the ones that seem to get forgotten, which is OPEB and pension. They're your biggest liabilities. They're out there. They're your obligations. At some point, you got to pay them. You've got employees. You give them great benefits, and at some point, those employees need to be paid. People are living longer due to the medical system and the improvements. So it's just getting to be a bigger liability. So back in the day, when people were living to be 68 or 70 years old, it was much more manageable. But now the good news is guys like us are not going to die as quickly. So, we're expected to live into our 80s now, which is not good news for the OPEB and the pension, because it's increasing those liabilities, but good news for us guys. So, so in the OPEB, the town, the return on investment was almost $500,000. Okay, so that was a 20% return. So great job on the management of those investments. 20% return. The model is based on a 6.2, I think, 25% return. So to earn 20%, you went way over the expectation for this year. In fact, the town's done a pretty good job of managing those expectations in the discount rate. So the OPEB took a little bit of a hit in the last couple of years just because of the way they calculated. The life expectancy, like I talked about, they used different tables, which increased the life expectancy. And there was a couple of other changes in the way the OPEB was calculated that drew you out of an asset position into a liability position. At one point, you were the only community in Massachusetts that had an asset in its OPEB account, not a liability. And you had gone to liability, now you've flipped back to being an asset. So congratulations, the OPEB's at its highest level. You've flipped back to being an asset out of the liability side, so you're back in the driver's seat on that. So that's all good news on the OPEB front.
Tony, excuse me, could you just explain what OPEB is for people?
Oh, sure. We've talked about it so much, sometimes I take it for granted. So OPEB is other post-employment benefits, which means that your employees, while they're working for you, are earning the ability to have health insurance and life insurance and other benefits when they retire. So they will continue to put in something from their retirement, but the town will be contributing a portion of that when the individual retires. So the retirement age is now 63 to get full retirement age. So if your employees are retiring at 63 and they live to the age of 90, you're going to have to fund their health insurance and life insurance for those 27 years, fund a portion of it. They'll also pay in a portion of it. But that's basically what that obligation is, that you are still obligated to your employees once they retire for those benefits. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it's good, just not everybody's aware of what OPEB stands for, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, super. If there's any more clarification, please chime in, but I think that's the best way I can explain it. The other benefit that you offer your employees is pension benefits or retirement benefits. To the outside world, it's Social Security. To municipal employees, it's belonging to the Essex Contributory Retirement System, West Newbury. Now, the Essex Contributory Retirement System was lagging in past years in the 40% rate in terms of how well they were funded. The closer you get to 100%, the better. I like to see retirement systems get over 60% at this stage in the funding process. And Essex is just under 60% now, so it's doing much better than it was, say, 3 or 4 years ago. So that has a lot to do with your assessments going up and also favorable market conditions, in their investments, just like you did with OPEB. They earn favorable investments also. So you folks are going in the right direction on your benefits. The town also has a stabilization fund for pension. You're one of the fortunate towns that can afford to do that. So a portion of your budget is being transferred. It's a small portion, but it's something. It's going into the pension stabilization fund so that as your assessments continue to increase, because they will, you can then draw on your pension stabilization fund. I continue to recommend that you fund that, with whatever reserves you have.
Tony, we haven't pursued this too much yet, but is there a way to, because it's not that the second pension stabilization fund is not that big in terms of dollars, but would we be able to ultimately, I don't think we've got a good answer on this yet from the state. Do you think we would be able to invest those funds the same way we invest OPEB funds or not?
Not quite right now. Those would be called, it's called a special purpose stabilization fund. So you have to go with the list, the investment list.
Right, but the pension fund itself, like the Essex County, can invest in individual stocks and so forth. So can we have a bylaw to call it and have a change at town meeting to call it something else so that we could do that?
I don't believe so. Like OPEB,
have you heard of anyone doing that? I guess.
No, I haven't. So with OPEB, there's this legislation that the state adopted back in 2013 or 12 that allowed OPEBs to be established like trusts where you could invest using the Prudent Investor Act. So you can basically go outside of the list, if you will. The stabilization falls under what's called the special purpose stabilizations. And those you have to follow what's on the investor list. Now, you could ask the state to put something on a bill that would allow you to invest just like an OPEB trust, just like you're doing now with your OPEB. You could do the same thing and see if you could get some special legislation from the state. I don't know about an overriding general place where you could put that money that the state has right now for pension. At least I don't.
Okay. I just wondered if you knew of other towns that might have done something, you know.
I see them using this special purpose stabilization, but I haven't seen anyone adopt, maybe Boston has something, but I haven't seen anyone adopt any special acts.
Well, it's probably a limited number of people towns that put in extra anyway.
Right. You're one of a handful. There's maybe, a couple of mine, Wilmington does, and maybe there's like 3 of mine that do this out of like 100 clients. So it is very limited. So yeah, I don't think there's any general overriding thing that you can use, but you can certainly ask the legislator to attach it to one of their bills, so it will allow West Newbury to invest the same way as the Essex Contributory Retirement System does.
And
The homework.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on OPEB or pension? Things are certainly going in the right direction in that area. The last time you got your bond rating, the pension was at like 42%. It was struggling. It was one of the reasons that they cited in your review. And the OPEB wasn't quite as healthy as it is now. So you've got those things going for you, and you've improved reserves. You've implemented financial policies and procedures. So there's a lot of things that are much better now than they were 3 or 4 years ago when you got your last review. So it's something to look forward to the next time you have a debt issuance. So next we're doing this with all our clients, just kind of looking at doing a questionnaire on the network security, and just basically telling our clients you've got to kind of be vigilant in this area with a lot of things being done remotely now, and information moving around, and just the security, and just saving, and the backups and things like that. From what I understand, your chief assessor is taking on the role of the cybersecurity coordinator. So that's a step in the right direction to at least have someone who's responsible for this, who's going to take the trainings, who's going to go, get all the goods and then bring it back to town and get you guys going on what needs to be done. What I particularly like to throw out there is the phishing, where they actually throw some bait out into an email and one of your employees falls for it. So on things like that, I'd like to see some training on that. And hang on a second, my screen just exploded. I'd like to see some training on that, where you're actually you're sending dummy emails to see who is vulnerable. And then those people need extra training about what to click on and what not to click on. And it's funny because in some of the towns that have done it, the finance director is the one that gets caught. So it's been really it's been funny seeing who gets caught and who doesn't. And but it is a really nice way to identify if someone's vulnerable and if they need extra training. The last thing you want is someone clicking on one of those fish baits and some of your money ends up in Portugal somewhere or in South America, because that's happened to some towns, unfortunately. So it looks like you've got a good, and going over this with Angus, that there's a good response here about having someone be the point person on cybersecurity and just going to all the trainings that the state offers and that things are out there and just get going in the right direction on that. I'm not saying there's any major issues in the town, that I wouldn't be talking about it in public if I thought there were. So I'm just saying it's just something you should be vigilant about. That's all. All right, next we talked about the treasurer's office, page 5. So a lot of things, a lot of good things happening here. We got a list of about 20 items, and I can talk about some of the big ones, like monthly bank reconciliations are done every month now. All the bank accounts, not just some of the bank accounts, they're all being done. Receivable reconciliations are all being done monthly. Looking at just the posting dates of different things are being done properly, not outside of the fiscal year or waiting 6 months to post something while things are piling up on a desk. That's all getting done. Reconciling the retiree health insurance right away so that there's no errors being reported. Reconciling the stabilization counts. Just a number of things. We don't have to go through all of them, but there's just about 20, 25 items. The water bill getting cleaned up. The tailings are a work in progress. So very pleased with the efforts of that department and that office. And I know it was a collective effort between the town manager, the town accountant, and the new treasurer to just come together and say, hey, we're a team. Let's decide what we need to do to get this going forward. The auditor's given us a great blueprint of what we need to fix. Let's start putting the pieces in place. And I see that happening. So it's very, very nice to see that. There was one item left that I'd like to see corrected, and I gave the treasurer a nice roadmap on that. And that's with the vendor account. The vendor account, whenever say a warrant is $300,000, you send 300, but then you void some checks. So it's only really 280. You should go in and correct that right away. Or say you send too much in on a warrant, you send it from your depository to the vendor account, and you send too much in. If you send too much in, you should correct it right away, because the vendor account should always be a zero balance account. Whatever's in the vendor account should always equal the amount of outstanding checks. And it doesn't in West Newbury because there's so many of these overfunds and underfunds dating back 4 or 5 years that have just never been cleaned up. So what I recommended was to open a new vendor account, brand new, so that you own it and run with that. Let the old one basically close itself down as checks get cashed, as activity happens. The old one closes itself down. And hopefully at the end of that process, all those overfunds and underfunds, they net each other out. And I can when I look at that, I see that happening when I do the quick, look at that. So, so the goal is, and I also showed the treasurer some of the obvious errors that she could fix, call the bank, fix these items. So we went through kind of like a nice little training process with the treasurer. And I'm going to go back in the spring before the audit starts and see where that process stands. So I'll be back in town hall. Let's look at where you're at. Where's the old vendor account at? Where's the new one at? So that we'll all work together to get this fixed. And that really is the last large item that needs to be fixed in that treasurer's function. So any questions on that?
Yeah, how long would you expect that to take to flush, for everything to flush through? I mean, typically, I think, is it 6 months that checks are given to be
Yes. Yes. So when I come in the spring, we're going to probably make a decision that any check that was going to be cashed has been cashed. And that I'm going to recommend that you do a tailings, which is an advertisement of the remaining checks. And then the person that the check was written to has 1 year to claim that. If they don't claim that, it becomes property of the town of West Newbury. So that's why we're coming in. We're coming in before the audit, so we can kind of get that ball rolling, so that by the time we get to the following audit cycle, it should be all cleaned out. And so hopefully that that's a process that is taking place when we get out there in the spring.
What kind of, Tony, what kind of numbers is this? Is this few thousands or tens of thousands, or what is it?
I'm thinking what you're going to be left with is a few thousand once everything clears out. I mean, the numbers in the reconciliation right now are enormous. You got 500,000 going one way, you got 400 going this way. But when I started looking at them, they offset each other. They're
Okay.
errors that compensate each other. Like there was an error here and then someone tried to correct it, but they didn't go into that error bucket. They corrected it in a different place. So,
Okay.
so I sat with the treasurer and I said, you got to look at this every month. And when you see things like that, call the bank up and say, hey, this offsets this, so that you don't have these big errors on both sides that are really kind of offsetting each other. So I think when I get out there in the spring, I think we're going to see a bunch of those errors fixed. Then we're going to see a bunch of small things, I think, that add up to just small thousands. I don't think it's going to be a big, I'm hoping it's not going to be a big number, but I got pretty comfortable looking at it that it wouldn't be. So, so hopefully I'm not called a liar next year. I think I did look at it close enough that I think we'll be okay. Any questions in the treasurers?
Nope.
So this is all good so far. We talked about the Town Manager Act. And one of the things that concerns me about the town, and I'm going to be very, very blunt, if I could, I see that to maintain the level of effort that's going on here, you got a lot of people working till 10 o'clock at night, and I don't know how long that can be sustained. So, ARPA CARES comes in, and it ends up in the town manager or the town accountant, or it ends up in those offices and it just bogs things down, but they still have all their other work to do. Then ARPA comes in, and that's a whole new thing that comes in and bogs down that office, besides all the other items that are just constantly hitting the office that are outside of the purview of the office. And one of my concerns is that if that continues, somebody's back is going to break somewhere. And I think you've got a lot of really nice momentum right now. I think you've got some really qualified, good people that are putting their heart and soul into this whole process and really grasping it and want it to work. And I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of the fact that when they need some help, they need some help. So I think some of that process has started. I don't know where it stands now, but I just want to at least get it out there that maybe bringing in some extra help, resources will help that process along, and make sure that people are not overworked, because overworked people look for jobs elsewhere, and the job market is hot. It's easy to get a job out there. So I tell towns, don't lose your good people. And because then it's difficult to replace those good people. So that's just my spiel on the whole Town Manager Act, possibly getting a town charter going, and just kind of really delineating what needs to happen in that office, in the accounting office, in the treasurer's office. What are the expectations? Do we have enough resources to manage those expectations? So that's those are my closing remarks, and I'll take some other questions now, if you will.
Tony, from sort of reflecting back to what you were just talking about, and staffing, and the fact that there's really not enough in the way of resources, human resources, handling the financial and administrative business of the town at this point in time. having seen a lot of other communities, if there was a single position, a single function that you thought was most important to add, to complement, to sort of reel in the overwork situation that there is right now for a specific, set of people. What would that single position be?
I would probably, if I was looking at this, and when we first started doing this audit, this was a small town. It still is a small town, but there's a lot going on in terms of how do we manage the things that are going on in this small town. And what I would probably suggest is maybe creating a finance director. You had the finance director position, maybe bring that back in as a finance director / assistant town manager. So they could take on some of those roles, and then possibly, and you could do that with current staff, completely capable current staff, and then bring in a town accountant, okay, that does all the debits and credits. And it removes an incredibly qualified person out of the minutia of debits and credits and puts them in a very strategic role for the town, and also leverages the town manager. And that's a role that I'd love to see. And I think you have the people to do that. And then in that sort of situation, you don't need the most qualified town accountant, because you'd still have the finance director above them. Almost kind of like you guys, I don't know if you remember Mike Bertino, who was your finance director for a while. I know Archie was around when Mike was around, and Mike really did a lot to help the other departments because he was the finance director and he was able to do that, or the other functions in that office. Stephanie is almost hands off right now with the treasurer's office, just because it's a segregation of duties issue. So she can't do too much with the treasurer's office if something happens there. Whereas if she was a finance director, you could serve that function and also help by being assistant town manager. Now you could take on some of the town manager's role, and you bring in that town accountant at a not a big salary, but some sort of someone who might be an assistant in a smaller town that might be interested in being a town accountant as a next stepping stone type of thing. I could see that doing a lot of good in that office. It would really clean some things up, and that would be my recommendation.
Thank you.
I don't know if the other people agree or not, but like I said, that's something that that seems to make sense to me.
Tony, I think we're out of questions. We didn't have a whole list for you.
You know, when the audit goes as smoothly as it did, the meetings aren't as long, which is kind of good. Yeah, no, it's a great job, everyone, from management to the employees in the ranks. Really good job all around. I think you should be proud of what you did this year, especially with the challenges of COVID and just all the issues with that, and just you came out on a good end here. So nice job, West Newbury. Be proud of yourselves.
Good to hear that perspective.
Okay, am I allowed to be dismissed?
Yeah, I think we're good, Tony. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks for your thoughts.
Thank you, and we'll see you all soon enough. Bye-bye.
Okay, have a good night. Bye-bye. Okay, we have a discussion of free cash / tax rate reductions. I guess, do you have something?
Well, so when Rick and I put together the, initial draft agenda last Tuesday, I thought I would have time to do a little more in the packet than what I did. the way the week went, all I did was just put in the trend. So I don't know how much there is to talk about tonight. It's really up to you. I just thought that with the, obviously that topic had come up at town meeting in terms of was that a good policy or a good kind of habit to get into. And, I think with the presentation of the audit and the tax rate, it just seemed like a natural extension of that. So I think, we can talk about it as much or as little as you want. I think the big, kind of the other side of the equation from the free cash reduction is what causes the free cash to kind of bounce up each year. And in general, there's not a single answer, but in general, it's the turnbacks. The sections of the budget that are set at a certain amount, but the actual spending is less. And so which are those departments that have over the years, fairly consistently turned back revenues? And, that's an example of a report I would have loved to put together for this packet that there just was not time to do. Anecdotally, there's some that we could talk about, whether that's fire or, solid waste is something that's been, consistently, significant turnbacks. Others like, we budget a little bit conservatively on health insurance because we don't know if there's a new hire on July 2nd, bringing in a family plan. That's, could be $28,000 if it's the most expensive plan. So we tend to carry a little bit of cushion there. So there's things like that where I think when you look at them closely, there are sections of the budget where I think we could tighten things up a bit, but there are other sections where.
But do you really want to do that?
Well, it depends on the section, because there's sections of the budget where you want to have that, contingency, if you will, like the fire staff.
Is one right there, it's a total crapshoot.
Well, right. And I think when you look at the actual compared to budget, I think we've actually done a very good job. And I can promise you that compared to what was going on, 4 years ago before I got here, we have a much finer grain of detail on the health insurance budgeting, just for example, than we ever did, where it's down to the head count, it's down to the specific plans. And the only margin or the only contingency is that caring for, let's say we hire, or let's say we replace 2 people who are right now not on health insurance with the most expensive family plan in the first month of the year. We budget if we do 2 of those. And that's so like, that's one example where we've tightened up quite a bit on the method. I don't know the numbers how it was before, but there was definitely not that level of detail in the budgeting, just in that section. But another one that's been very tough, especially in FY20, was the solid waste and specifically the recycling, because the market, when the FY20 budget was, or the FY21 budget was brought forward. No, it was the FY20 budget. That was when there was the whole national sword policy with China. And so the recycling market was crazy. And at one point, the disposal costs were over $90 a ton. And that happened to be in like December, or not, like January, February 2019. So the Board of Health took that high number, annualized it, and they set the recycling budget as if that would be the disposal cost for recycling. It ended up that the market fluctuated quite a bit. That was kind of an outlier of quite how high it was. And that ended up being, a section of the budget where there were significant turnbacks in FY20. I talked to Blake Seal last week. He said that, very recently, they're now seeing for the first time in a couple of years that there is actually a little bit of revenue that's now being generated by our recycling. So it's just, it's been a difficult thing to budget for. I think fire staffing is one that, Stephanie and I, meet with the chief every year, and we try to get to a finer degree of why the numbers are where they are. But at the end of the day, if the Board of Fire Engineers is saying, this is what we think they should be, unless we want, like, we can't, at some point you rely on your department heads.
As I've said before, why do we talk so much about this? Because in the end, it doesn't make any difference.
Well, I think that's where in terms of the other side of the coin, that's where I think the free cash drawdown to offset the tax rate, I think represents a near term returning that money to the taxpayer rather than sitting on it, which, I think makes sense.
We're being conservative in case we have an extra expense, but if we don't then need that extra expense, we give it back in the fall.
Promptly, right,
It
yeah.
doesn't seem like a bad system.
Yeah, I mean, there's some sections of the budget, and we'll get into this in great detail, I know, with this budget season, but there's some sections we budget pretty much down to the dollar.
Yeah. We talk about it
we talk about a
ever
lot.
since I've been here, 2000, we talked about this, and we still haven't solved it, but the town should be, we're in a good position. Why, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
It would be interesting sometime to have a listing. I don't know how hard it would be, Angus, to generate a listing of turnbacks.
It
We know what.
yeah, it wouldn't, the only thing that makes it just a little more time consuming than it would have been is the software conversion.
Yeah.
But once we account for, I mean, we could do it for the soft right years and then for the Vadar years and then just blend those together. So it wouldn't be difficult. It's just with the focus on the tax rate hearing and some of the other things in the office the last couple of weeks, I couldn't bring myself to ask Stephanie to do that.
Yeah.
But I know if I asked her to do it, she could do it.
Yeah, well,
It's just there's been other work that was more pressing.
I think
Yeah.
it would be instructive.
Yeah, I think like a 5-year report on turnbacks would be very instructive. Yeah,
But with details to
Yeah.
what the turnbacks were from, well, actually, and, you know, just what does contribute to free cash, you know, because
Mhm.
obviously it isn't all turnbacks, it's also money that comes in, you know, over the.
like the FEMA reimbursements for the 2018 storms that are received in 2021, right?
Exactly.
That
Just-
kind of thing.
Just
Yeah.
so that when, you know, because I've had questions from people about free cash and I don't have the information. It would be-
But there's so many like one-time events that I can think back on. We got, when we got out of the incinerator contract and from Wheelabrator, the town got a huge chunk of money one time that contributed to the free cash, but I mean, that was really significant amount of money, and that I don't know, I don't want to create more work for anyone.
No, I agree.
When
That's why
something isn't doing such a, when we correct a minor issue 6 months later, it seems like a good system.
Archie, my concern is about being able to communicate with people, and so I don't think that from my perspective, I wouldn't even need to see 5 years, if I saw 1 year or 2 years. That way, when you're asked a question, you can say, well, I don't know exactly, but for instance, this has been the situation in the previous year. And, you know, so you can just sort of put a concern or a question to bed and, but, you know, without Angus or Stephanie having to go jump through hoops to pull together numbers.
It's not hard. We can run that report. We just didn't have, you know,
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
I mean, for tonight, it just
There's not
wasn't,
that much-
but
I don't
it's
see this
not
happening
difficult,
for-
yeah.
Within
Yeah.
the next month, or 2
Yeah.
months, you know.
And it's definitely part of the budget process. It's definitely part of what FinCom looks at is, you know, the prior year. We give them data for the prior 3 years so they can see the actual and the budgeted. And they definitely look at, you know, and they definitely, you know, put the screws to department heads who are, you know, coming in with a budget and they're saying, well, you didn't spend that much 2 years ago. Why do you need that much? And one thing I will say about, you know, I think we've had a very healthy budget process here in the 3 years I've been here, you know, and I would say beyond that, I think our FinCom, in my opinion, does a great job. They have the right balance between asking really tough questions, having really, you know, they really do their homework. The members of that committee, they come in very well prepared. They look at all of the data that we provide them, which is substantial. But they also, when you give them a good explanation, they tend to and at least the experience I've had has been very favorable. I have worked in towns where, and I'm sure Stephanie has as well, and others where there's this mentality of like, if I don't spend it, I'm going to lose it. If I, a department head, don't spend it, I'm going to lose it. And therefore, some towns I've seen, you know, in June, you see departments going on like spending sprees because, you know, they got to get this equipment or they got to get this conference registration because they feel like if we don't spend it, like the powers that be are gonna, snatch it away. And rather than, I think here we have a good balance where if there's an aberration one year, where you budgeted because you thought you were going to do something and for whatever reason it didn't happen. I think it's a small town. You explained to the FinCom, and we do get into that level of granular detail. In fact, the last couple of years, and I believe this is a first that didn't happen before I was here, but I've actually done a complete data, detail export to the FinCom, which means every transaction from every department. And I just uploaded Dropbox. Here's the 1,000 pages. And if you find an expense in there that you have a question, and I promise you, like most towns do not that it's all public, someone can come in and ask that, but most towns, I've never actually seen a town provide that level of transparency. I have provided that to our finance committee because in my career, I've found if you're totally transparent, it goes a long way at building goodwill that people say, oh, okay, you're not, our books are open. So I think that's, been helpful in engendering some goodwill, but we have had some departments underspend, DPW has underspent a couple of years in a row. And in FY20, I know that was largely driven by COVID because, for instance, to the high hazard trees, that article, unfortunately, we had to give back, over 80% of the $50,000 article. And that was largely because with COVID, everything got, in the last 4 months of the year when the high hazard trees would have been put out to contract and all of that just conspired that there was just no way to spend that money by June 30th. So those things do happen. But when you sit with the department head and go through like, why did that happen? Usually there's a very good reason. So
one thing I would say is that again, that we're doing a good job. So I don't know that we want to mess with things too much, is that in the past, there's been a lot, say 10 years ago, the FinCom and the select board had to deal with way more usage of the reserve fund. And we've been lucky the last few years. We have in starting, even early on, this time of year using reserve fund, not at the end of the year when we know we're not going to need it. And then the concern in January, when we've already used 3/4 of the reserve fund, is the reserve fund not going to be adequate? And that happens when you're too conservative in your budget.
we're too aggressive.
Too aggressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, too aggressive. And that's a pain because it's if somebody needs to purchase something and it has to go through the hoops of the reserve fund, that really slows down the availability of the service or the item that needs to be purchased. So just throw that out there.
Yeah. Plus it puts an additional demand on people's time, on everybody involved in the process.
That's what I mean, yeah.
And if time go is a limited resource, so.
But it sounds like that's what FinCom would prefer, right? Rather than turning free cash flow. That's my
It
impression.
seems like it, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't think we're gonna go anywhere.
No.
I know, but I do think as we, get into the kind of budget process, that I think we'll really start in earnest, in the next week with department heads, but in December, I think with the board, I think looking at those, prior few years and looking at what are those opportunities within the operating budget where, maybe we could be more, tighten our belt. I know back in my first budget, the board had asked me very specifically, it was one of the directions that you gave me right at the beginning of the process was to identify any aspects of the budget where there may be opportunity for significant cost savings. And I think you defined that as 100,000 or more. And my conclusion, which I presented when I proposed the FY20 budget, which was my first budget, was the only way in this budget to save that kind of money in a single department head is to cut staff. There's no like big chunk of fat that you can just cut. You are going to be cutting services or cutting staff. But I think that was a good question to ask, because it really pushed me to say, not just like nibbling around the edges, but are there opportunities for more significant savings? And over the course of multiple years, perhaps there are opportunities through regionalization or that kind of thing, but those things do take years to implement. Once the policy direction is set to pursue that, it still can take 3 to 5 years anyway to actually like regionalize a service. We were able to do it, I guess, to some extent with Concom, but even that like should have been super simple, and it took 5 months, and the stars needed to align in terms of the timing and retirements and certain things that are way beyond either town's control. So not only were we fortunate in terms of the stars aligning, it still took, I'd say 5 months of pretty intensive effort for a very small department. And it wasn't even, and the goal in that case wasn't even cost savings. It was really employee retention and recruitment, which was a very good goal and a very important goal, but it wasn't like a cost savings. But yeah, I just thought since we were talking about audit and we're talking about tax rate, it was a good time to just, bring it up for discussion. Yeah.
Okay, next we have a discussion regarding the process to determine uses for the American Rescue Plan Act. ARPA fund.
So we do have, you've been hearing about these different buckets of federal money coming down the pike, and we do have some amount of so-called ARPA or American Rescue Plan Act funds actually in the bank, and that's what you see on page 87 of your packet. That $704,000 is actually funds we have in the bank. We have, I believe, another 3 years to use the money. So that's part of why we haven't brought it forward, right away, is we've been trying to give myself, Stephanie, and Jenny time to go to the various webinars. There's all kinds of, there's been interim rules, there's been revised rules. It's been a kind of a moving target.
So not till, what's the date on that? 3 years from now?
So let's see, December 31st, 2024.
Okay, that's more than.
So there is a pretty steep learning curve on this, because there's been so much guidance and it's not all been consistent, and it's been kind of shifting as we go. But I do think that the general parameters of what the eligible expenses are has been pretty clear and pretty consistent right along.
I mean, I read this, Angus, and it's so much bureaucracies, I didn't get a lot out of it. What's your take?
From a, with that kind of amount of money, it's tempting, at least from where I sit, to look at what are some big dollar projects that might be able to go forward with this money.
But I didn't even get a feel for what kinds of things is reading.
Well, like, we don't have sewer, but water infrastructure. I think the discussion there ends up being, where that's an enterprise fund as opposed to the taxpayer funded, operating budget. I think I wanted to at least just float that trial balloon tonight, not looking for the board to make a decision on that, but just to talk generally about how do you feel about, whether some significant portion of this funding should go toward water infrastructure, where that is a known need. We do have a backlog of projects, and we have a limited number of ratepayers. But on the other hand, the taxpayer could say, wait a second, that should all go toward general fund expenses, not enterprise fund. So I think it's kind of a philosophical question. But water infrastructure is eligible. It's got the caveat that it's got to be, got to meet the standards for the state revolving fund. And Mike Goutet and I have been to a couple of sessions on that just in the last 2 weeks. And there's a lot of red tape with the SRF funding too. But it does seem that water projects would generally be eligible in terms of big ticket items. You know, for something like, obviously, we asked the question about like the Middle Street Bridge, could any portion of those cost? And so, well, maybe this, you know, you'll recall that we had to add a storm scepter, you know, on the stormwater treatment. Like you might be able to carve out that portion of that and argue that it's a water quality improvement. Maybe, and that might, you know, maybe it could.
What was the thing? It's 50,000.
Exactly. Yeah. So some of it, and I think Stephanie and Jenny have been to more of the webinars on this topic than I have, but on the reporting side, that's where, you know, we want to be cautious about, you know, the number, at least from where I sit, you know, the number of projects that we support, because the more things you try to do, the more complex the paper trail, and
3 big ones is easier than 10 little ones.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or one huge one, maybe.
Right.
Okay.
So the stormwater, would that be like erosion control? or-
I think so. Yeah, I think some of what we saw on the River Road, you know, or if there's culverts that are undersized, that it talks about habitat restoration. There's that one site that, you know, that you'd pointed out on the walking. There might be projects like that that could be very attractive
Yeah.
and solve multiple needs.
I guess the other thing we need to consider is, you know, for some of those projects, and I know, you know, grant, despite the number of letters, it actually is a 4-letter word, or can be a 4-letter word. But those are all things, you know, all projects or types of projects where there are significant grant monies available, and you know, say habitat restoration. That you know, that's something where there's, you know, there's a state agency that funds that kind of stuff, and so if we chose to pursue that. So I guess I'm just thinking that we should be careful not to use this on something where there might be another resource available.
How should we go about this? I mean, like,
Some towns have been very, you know, very proactive about inviting a lot of public input, you know, doing public sessions on what the allowable uses are. And then, you know, certainly some of the bigger communities have done polls, you know, that they've sent out to the community asking for broad input on how people think the funding should go.
so, I mean, this isn't like earth-shattering amount of money. It's large, but
Right.
it's not.
transformative.
No.
Right. But it could, you know, and that's why I think using it strategically is going to be important, because it could do some real good. But no, it's not going to, like, you know, we can't take a year where we're just not going to raise tax, you know, not like we're just going to like zero out people's tax bill for a year. It's not that kind of.
It's not that.
And there's things that, and Stephanie, I don't know if you want to, you know, speak to this or not, but the whole like lost revenue, that's a much bigger opportunity in some of the, you know, larger communities who may have seen significant, you know, reductions in tax collections or things like that. We've spent a little time looking at that. Stephanie's spent more time than I have, but I think our concern about that is the amount of documentation you need to do to show that you lost the revenue. You've got to engage a third-party specialist to do that and expend some resources to do that. And is it worth doing that?
Well, the question is, I mean, how much did we really lose?
We lost, in my estimation, well, this is where it gets a little interesting. We did lose some rental income, which we could quantify very easily. But my understanding of it, and Stephanie, you could elaborate, is that the way, because this was a federal program, the way they looked at it is they looked there at like trends of how much your taxes went up kind of year after year, and they make an assumption of what your tax growth would have been, which, if I understand it, it probably wouldn't have been, but that's how the formula works. And so I think Tony gave me an estimate of something like 6%, that the state would assume that your revenues would have gone up 6%, even though in reality they wouldn't have. But that's the way that it's designed. So that could pencil out to be a pretty significant amount of money here in West Newbury. I think I've probably butchered it, Stephanie. Do you want to kind of clarify what I've said?
No, so you said it correctly, Angus. I'm not really prepared to kind of get into it too much tonight, but there is a hefty formula that has to be done. We had a little bit of revenue loss, but we also can factor in certain grants, pretty much all funding sources across the board, with the exception of some of them. Some of them we cannot. So it's not just general fund revenues. Other portions of our revenue sources fall into it as well. So I'm not, right now, I didn't do like a portion of the calculation to kind of give exact numbers or even close. But it is a process, and like Angus stated, it's best to hire an outside firm to do that for us, which can then be to hire them, we can use ARPA funding to pay them as well. If the board were to go that route on that.
And I talked to Tony about it maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago on this specific issue of revenue replacement. And my basic takeaway was, if we think there are enough eligible uses based on what is eligible to expend the funds we have, I do not think it would be worthwhile.
Oh, I see.
I think if you wanted to free up some funds, if there was something you wanted to do, like the Middle Street Bridge that is clearly not eligible, if you do the revenue replacement, that amount of what's calculated to be lost revenue would then essentially become free cash and no longer restricted. So if you think you have enough projects to expend, roughly 704,000, I don't think you need to try to untie the money. But if you didn't feel that you did, that might be something we would look at.
Okay.
So would this, say for example, we did use it for a stormwater project, would this funding include the administration and management of the project? Could you hire a firm to?
You definitely could, yeah, and that's actually something that's very enticing. If you go on the, Mass Municipal Job Board, you'll see a number of current postings for ARPA-funded administrative positions, especially in the larger communities. But there's definitely the bigger communities. They're hiring full-time staff just to administer these funds. Really?
Yeah, payroll is a job posting for it.
Yeah, and in some cases, they're funding portions of positions, portions of newly created, or I don't know how they're doing it, but portions of positions are dedicated to administering the ARPA funds.
It's essentially
What happens when the money?
So
Yeah.
if we get this amount of money, what does Springfield get?
There's some big numbers out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, what happened with us, we got the initial allocation of about 247, but then this additional amount of the 457 is because the county government does not exist and has been dissolved. So basically, we got a proportional amount of what would have gone to the county. So that's why there's the two amounts there.
So again, imagine what bigger city is getting for filming or something compared to what?
I think Lawrence got about 54 million.
Did they really? Wow.
Wow.
So any chance they'll use that for with the stormwater connection issues?
Yeah.
The
That would be
CSOs.
great.
CSOs,
We'll separate their.
There's a new mayor in Lawrence, so we'll see what happens.
That's a good opportunity. So my general thought when I look at grant funds in general is, I would always favor funding something that would otherwise be funded by the taxpayer rather than thinking up something new. Because, we've got a backlog of projects, every town does. And so, isn't it better to fund something that would otherwise be paid locally rather than just something that's like some, focus on the need to haves, not necessarily the want to haves. But with that said, there are definitely eligible uses that could advance any number of policy priorities of the board and of the town.
Yeah, it seems to me that it's worth over the course of the next few weeks, just thinking, trying to, imagine not imagine, but, close a list of significant projects that we know we have to do at some point.
And one thing we could do, which would be actually very, wouldn't take long at all, at least the first cut at it, would be to take the project list on the capital program, which is about 100, separate items, and just go through it with a highlighter of which of these may be eligible for ARPA.
Yeah.
And if some of those are,
That's
in year 5 or year 7 of the capital program, maybe you could bring them forward because now you have funding that you didn't expect. I don't think we could have a definitive answer, but we could at least at a first cut say, does it look like it generally might be eligible?
So I'm curious on the broadband projects on the last category, would that include like improving cell service that we were talking about with respect to MVP? No, or was that specifically for internet?
My guess is, and I think when it comes to cell, my expectation when it comes to cell service, cellular improvements, I mean, you need to deal with the vendor. The vendor really should be paying for that. It should be something that the town should pay for. In fact, if we were to do it right, and when any big transmission capability was installed, was built on town land, then it would be a revenue source for us. I think. But yeah, I think that the thing about broadband services probably more oriented towards Western Mass. Yeah. There are not many communities that have both Verizon and Comcast.
Fighting it.
Fighting for market share in our town. Jim, obviously Lawrence is a lot bigger. How many broadband carriers are there in Lawrence?
They have the two, Verizon and Comcast, but I think Haverhill, a better example, downtown only allows for one type of service. I think just Verizon is downtown, and the outskirts do Comcast, but Comcast doesn't want to have to pay to upgrade the lines in downtown. So that would be actually a really good project for Haverhill, to have multiple carriers downtown.
So, what I'd kind of outlined is if we think of this as, if we look at this kind of in parallel with the budget process, not the operating budget, but really the capital program process. That's not limiting. There's definitely non-capital eligible expenses, but I feel like that's, that gives everyone time to kind of get their head around it. Stephanie and I talked when we were putting the packet together of, do we put in the 2-pager or the 48-page of, there's so much guidance we've gotten. We're happy to share all of it. It makes our head spin. And so we decided to keep it simple because it gets so complicated so quickly. But, we've myself, Stephanie, Jenny have each been to multiple webinars and workshops on this in the last 6 months. And, the devil's in the details, because the general allowance for uses has been, like I said, pretty consistent right throughout, but there's, there's these caveats, like it says water projects, if they're SRF eligible. Well, that is a big if. That Mike Goutte and I are still trying to figure out, would a main replacement be eligible? We kind of think it would, but I'm not prepared to say it definitely would. So I'm sure this is going to be a huge topic at the MMA conference in January. I think a lot of towns are trying to get their head around it.
Speaking of which, and you've signed up. I suspect already.
I haven't yet. I need to sign up. I'll definitely be there. Yeah.
I just sort of, I think I want to go, but I forgot.
Yeah. Is it going?
I don't know, we've done the day, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Flexible. Daytime work schedule.
Yeah. And they've been doing a lot of webinars. check that out.
Okay. Roll down that. We can each, I guess, at our leisure or at our convenience, take a look at the capital plan.
Yeah,
And,
I think that's a good news.
yeah,
So if I wanted to look at a reference that made my head spin, what would that be?
We will, Stephanie, can you make Wendy's head spin and just send out some of the things we put on the shared server? Yeah, just
Absolutely.
some of the recent
I have a
ones,
whole
'cause-
bunch of stuff.
All right,
Yeah.
bring it on.
Yeah, since, the more recent stuff, because some of the stuff even from 3 months ago is now.
Yeah, I have a nice slideshow from a training I went to last week or the week before I can send as well.
One of the challenges, at least I find is very challenging, I would think anyone would, is some of the state websites on this. It's like these links, everything is a list, and everything on the list is a hyperlink, and every hyperlink goes to another page with a lot of hyperlinks. So I'm someone who, I want to read everything and understand everything. And the way they set this up, they try to be user-friendly. I find it is absolutely not user-friendly because it keeps looping you back sometimes to the same site. It's the same, yeah, anyhow, I feel like I wish they'd just like give you like a bound book, like here's what you need to read. Because all these hyperlinks, it's like
Then it would not be.
this
as dated.
eternal kind of recurrence.
right. And when do I want to return to go? When do I want to back up?
Yeah.
The whole premise. Of
Yeah, well, at least either way, I leave all the tabs open so that I don't lose where I was. And that's part of why my computer starts to get angry at me, is because I have too many tabs open. But
Okay. So we have a public hearing for proposed personnel policy. Next page.
Page 88 is the notice, or page 89, yeah.
Thanks.
So was there any feedback other than that one email?
No, there was something that, oh, yeah, you're good, yeah.
So, we're opening a public hearing for a select board personnel policy. Second. All in favor? Thanks. Make motion. Yes, thanks. Okay, so go ahead. Now we're officially open.
So you'd asked if there was another comment besides the one question that came in about comp time versus payment of overtime. No, really the two issues I've become aware of, and I don't think there's others, but Stephanie and I, we're both so busy. We don't talk all the time. So maybe you've heard of things I haven't, but one of them was a request for clarification on overtime versus comp time and whose choice is that? And so let me circle back to that because it's not as simple as I thought it was. The second one, which no one specifically raised to me, but arose from a kind of somewhat related discussion on the funding of costs related to these vaccination clinics, is that I think if the board does adopt it, we would want to clarify. This was never intended to apply to first responders like fire or EMA. It specifically doesn't apply to union. So we had already kind of carved out police and DPW for the reason that they really have good systems in place, long established systems where the respective department heads approve those requests, and it's all documented. But fire, where we budget, generally, we don't budget down to the hour the way we do with other town personnel. It was never my intent that this would apply to fire. Obviously, the Board of Fire Engineers and the chief, they manage all of that. And I certainly don't want to be between, you know, the workers and whether they can respond to the fire. So I think if this is adopted, whether tonight or at a future meeting, I think it should specify that it does not apply to fire or EMA. And in practice, it really wouldn't anyway, because we don't budget them, you know, specifically by hours per week. But that's one thing that came to my attention. The other, on the whole issue of, you know, comp time versus overtime, if someone's above 40 hours, it generally is up to the employee. But, you know, Tim had sent some advice on that was, so it was generally what I understood. You know, I've always understood it was up to the employee whether they take the time off or get paid. In either instance, it's time and a half. But what Tim sent me is that under the FLSA or Fair Labor Standards Act, as a condition for use of comp time in lieu of overtime payment in cash, the act requires an agreement or understanding reached prior to the performance of work. He elaborates saying this could be accomplished by a collective bargaining agreement, a memorandum of understanding, or any other agreement between the town and representatives of the employees. Or if they don't have a representative, comp time may be used in lieu of cash overtime only if such an agreement or understanding has been arrived at between the town and the individual employee before the performance of the work. So it's pretty much what I thought. It's just a little bit more nuanced than that. But I think the spirit of the policy is basically looking for that advance approval before the time is spent. So I think that would be a, you know, appropriate time that, you know, the manager could say, oh, do you prefer comp time or overtime? In my experience, it's always been the employee's option, whether to get paid for the time or to take it as, you know, earned time off. But other than that, we haven't gotten any comments. No.
So here's a sort of a hypothetical. An employee is already approaching their allowed hours for the week, and they're in a meeting, and the meeting runs much longer than anticipated.
Yep.
And
Like now?
And well, we're not employees.
We only bring our exempt employees to these meetings.
Not funny.
And that meeting runs much longer than anticipated, and the employee realizes that they are now exceeding their allowable hours. How do they deal with that? Because they can't get up. And walk
Right.
out of the meeting.
No, I mean, I think the spirit of the proposed policy is really to initiate that, you know, conversation ahead of time. As you know, this very instance, not the specific thing you're describing, but this instance of employees feeling the need to work more than their budgeted hours has been coming up for, you know, at least a couple of months, let's say. And so what I've told employees in that instance, before there was a policy, there is still no policy on the books. I've said, if you work the time, we are obligated to pay you. That's not a choice we make. Like, if you work the time, under federal labor law, you are entitled to pay for that time. The intent of the policy is to open some dialogue so that, you know, you don't have someone just kind of running up, you know, a lot of hours above budget, and then, you know, management, not just me specifically, but management generally has to then figure out how do we find the money. But in general, it's not the employee's job to figure out where the money comes from. It's management's job. So management needs enough transparency that, you know, work is going to be spent above budgeted time so that management can start to think about how to solve that problem, and ideally, you know, and either authorize the work or to not authorize the work. So, but in the instance you're describing, I think if the employees, you know, if that were to happen, you know, once and it was kind of an aberration, there's no issue. If that was something that was happening every payroll period, I think that's when management would have the, you know, the obligation to sit and say, look, what's going on here? You know, you're budgeted for X hours a week and you're consistently working X plus 3 or whatever. Um, I mean, part of what creates this, the situation is we do budget pretty precisely on wages. I mean, it's actually quite precise. It's, the weeks in the year times the hours per week. And with some departments, like, assessing or town clerk, or, others, will carry typically a dollar amount. Like I think assessing carries something like maybe $3,000. It's just like a round number. They carry in the budget for backup staffing. So if the assistant is not available, they can bring in a part-time person and they have some budget to hit with that. It's a fairly modest amount of money. Some departments don't even do that. And it's just the employee times the hours per week, times the week per year. And that is the personnel budget, really down to the dollar. So if there's any instance where, either there's work that can't be done in the allocated time, or, even if there's an instance of someone's out on a lengthy medical leave and you need to have a backup. I mean, that we had that in my office, a couple of years ago where someone was out for a surgery for an extended period of time. So we brought in a backup, we got the person appointed, sworn in, and, we had to, I think that year we did have to go to get a line item transfer because the personnel budget hadn't accounted for this extra person who was there for a period of probably 2 months to provide backup. So there's any number of reasons why your actual, personnel budget may differ in any given year from what's budgeted. So I think the spirit of the policy is to have a, line of dialogue there, that it's not just we get that, we meaning the finance department get the timesheet after the fact. At that point, we don't have a choice but to pay it. And right now there is nothing on the books to say that there's anything wrong with that. So the idea would be to have that dialogue ideally before the time is spent.
So how would this work, like the vaccine clinics, or something that's not, with the fire department and other staff? I mean, that's not part of the normal operation of the department.
Mhm.
But it's still, function of the fire department. I mean, how would this apply?
It's a little bit, I guess I'll tell you what I think. I don't, the fire department, we budget based on contingencies. We obviously don't know in any year how many fires or emergency events there will be. The vaccine clinics is something the town has opted to participate in. So, I view the time that the fire staff spend is totally, legitimate, supportable, and that would be paid. If or when we get reimbursed from Amesbury in the future, based on the money they're going to receive from the insurance billings, which we fully expect to get, I would then want to journal that money or journal those expenses over so that it hits that offsetting revenue and doesn't hit the operating budget. But if at the end of the day that doesn't happen, there is money in the fire budget to cover. It's not down to the hour. It's not budgeted down to the hour. So, if it was weekly clinics year round, that might be a different thing. But at this point, we're looking at a total of 6 clinics. So it's and we've worked with the chief and we got an estimated cost, and it wouldn't be a huge budget buster. And we're going to try to get that money, and I think we will. With other staff costs, my approach would be, can you work fewer hours elsewhere in that work week to keep your total hours within the budgeted hours? And I think that's the agreement that we have, is what we've been told.
I think it's all pretty understandable. Okay. I don't know you're prepared to move forward with the so there was one, I didn't jot it down, but there was one note of something, which Jim may have noted, one change we have to make here. I can't recall what it was.
Oh, tonight, the fire, that it wouldn't apply to fire.
Yeah, there was fire. I thought there was something else before that, so. too. Okay. Well, that being the case, and I would move that we approve the amendment to personnel policy regarding overtime and compensatory time work. For time worked above budget hours policy. With that single amendment about it not the pre-approval of overtime for fire.
Or EMA.
Or EMA not being required.
And where would that be in the policy? And did you have a?
No, I didn't, no. I think the best section would be maybe a new applicability section at the beginning.
Yeah. Okay.
When it does say exempt employees, it could go into that.
Well, actually, they're not exempt. The exempt
Right.
employees is referring to this.
Yeah, so it could go under the overtime pay and compensation time. That's the line.
It refers in
Well,
here,
they're still eligible for overtime, it's just that they don't have to get approved, right? Is that the distinction?
let's see.
Those, like, a line thing, exempting.
Let's see.
Or time work above budget hours.
Yeah.
Here's-
The end of the overtime section, the overtime must be authorized in advance by the town manager. And we can just put, this is not, with the exception of, for fire. Or this is not applicable to fire.
You know, actually, so I'm looking at page 90, under section 1, it refers to town managers responsible for oversight of overtime for non-union employees. You know, it might be something to add. I don't know, I kind of like the idea of adding an applicability section just right up front that kind of that spells it out specifically. So it's not subject to interpretation. Yes, that says it does not apply to union DPW, or to any union employee, nor to fire, nor to EMA.
Just make it a separate section.
Yeah, just to make it really clear and unambiguous, rather than like general language that has to be interpreted.
Goes on header.
Yeah, I would suggest, you know, just right at the top, applicability section.
So even before the line says compensatory.
No, right below that. Yeah, because that would be the heading of the whole section.
Okay.
And then just say applicability, this policy. Yeah, correct.
Then they're not even have to read it.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's going to be clearest.
This will not be applicable to union employees, fire and. So I guess the question was to approve the policy as presented with that. Any more discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're never gonna,
Motion to go on to
oh, yeah, that's right,
Close-
yeah,
close the
yeah,
public hearing.
yeah, thank you. I move to close the public hearing. 50 years of experience you have. All in favor? Aye. Okay, so, next topic is the, updated work to establish housing trust. It looks like we just, by just adopting the, state, state law that we automatically define a lot more than we probably would define on our own.
Well, you know, if you, yeah, if you appoint a trust under the statute, it will have all the powers and authorities that a trust has under the statute. Or you could pare it back. And if you do that, a bylaw would be the mechanism to do that. But there's a lot of really good, you know, questions that, you know, are in this draft committee charge, which, you know, I think it comes down to, do you feel like the trustees should be answering those questions after they're appointed, or do you want to get some more clarity on some of that before you build up this trust? So I don't think there's a wrong answer. I think either of those are totally reasonable paths to follow.
Yeah, when you're adopting the state, state law would obviously be easier than putting together our own bylaw. It struck me that there's a lot of, use the technical term, gobble, in state, state law. And maybe it's all relevant, but I'm sure it is all relevant to somebody, to some community, but is it all relevant to us? How does it down to that?
I had one question about an authority that is on page 98. 11. So if we just did it, just use the blueprint here. So the housing trust, item 11, borrowed some money and rehabilitated a building to create 6 affordable units, say. But it didn't work and it went bankrupt. Who's on the hook for that money? It says that they have the power to borrow money. The money, is the trust bankrupt, or are the taxpayers on the hook for the trust? And it just struck me, okay, we're giving them the power to borrow money on the full faith and credit of the town of West Newbury, are we, or is it?
They're not bonding money, but they're not bonding money. So I don't think it's a full faith and credit, but I can't answer your question on if they were to take I think it's an important question too, at least a theoretical one. You know, in reality, it probably wouldn't come up, but I think it's talking about like a bank loan. It's not like incurring debt, but yeah, it could take a loan.
Okay, but still a.
Yeah, no, it's
project,
a very, yeah, for sure. No, I don't know the answer to that.
The construction costs or escalate, or I don't know, just creating scenarios, but I just want to know who is the cosigner.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, when.
Somebody would know that, because.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing, when Lee and I spoke with Shelley Gehring from MHP, she said some examples she gave of the kinds of kind of checks against, some of the authority that some towns, have put in is, for instance, acquiring lands, requiring a select board approval for a trust to acquire property, as one example. Borrowing might be another one, that certain things would trigger some additional oversight.
There's some advantage to, it's more work to propose a bylaw, but I think it gives residents more of a sense of being involved in starting this up. But we kind of sold it like establishing a trust is just the first step.
Maybe they have more buy-in of the whole process.
Yeah. Yeah, that was my thought with establishing a committee. I would expect the people that work on the committee would be an actual member of the trust, but it's just like a separate process, and I think it helps define some of the issues, like how are we going to handle more land first, as well as what we want the trust to do.
Is that an overwhelming, I agree with you, everybody, but I'm just saying that like, it's to have the committee figure out the nuts and bolts of how they do stuff as well as what they do. It's a big nut to crack, to figure out, this is, first of all, it's gonna be a trust that does not have, $14 billion. It doesn't have huge, you're gonna have to use, the money judiciously, or, have a pretty narrow focus at the beginning. But we don't want to necessarily have the focus too narrow, because maybe in 10 years it will be, could have more resources and be able to do more, but it just, I'm just picture the people being on the committee going, what about now, what do we do? It seems like we have to give them some direction and some blueprint before, just to say, okay, you figure out how to do it and what to do. That's tough. That's a very, it's in a relatively short amount of time.
Yeah, that's my concern. The schedule seems pretty tight to get into any town meeting, but there's so much guidance online by the Mass Housing Partnership, like how to establish a trust, how to write a bylaw, which sample bylaws. And the people that have expressed interest are heavily engaged in this already, so I don't think.
Okay, if you're optimistic.
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
But
should they have some direction or?
well, that's the point of this, this charge, this 2 pages here. It's really, the things they should look at. Having a public hearing, I think is important, the public input and buy-in, and then make a recommendation.
Yeah, that's good, yeah.
Yeah, the rest of this, it says draft on it, but that's just the state, regulation. And some resources that I found. So.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot of material to work with to model after. In fact, there's material in the state regulation so.
Yeah, I think, based on the information I found, I could draft a bylaw now, but what I didn't want to have happen is all these people that have expressed interest be kind of shut out of the process.
Yeah.
If we were
That makes sense.
Well, we need bylaw, maybe probably what, March or so.
Yeah, I put March 1st. I think, as long as we know that it's coming, we replace it.
Yeah. It doesn't really, wouldn't affect the FinCom schedule.
Right.
Because This is the money issue.
Yeah, so maybe March
Well,
31st.
kind of, I don't know.
Well, they may have concerns about the financial part of it. Do you see a downside, Angus, with having a committee versus just?
Not really. No, I mean, it's, it's especially where the kind of charge is already written and, no, I think there's a lot of logic to it. It is a steep learning curve.
So the proposal that you have, using inclusionary housing funds, could that person be in support of the committee?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, totally. I mean, you can read it as well as I can. I think that was the whole point of the, those kind of interim regs was to help stand up a trust. So if this is, this is the path to do that, then I'm sure no one would question that. I mean, one of the things I've favored about a trust all along is getting, once those funds are actually in the trust, that is a widely recognized kind of bona fide vehicle to handle those funds in terms of eligible uses and procedures through authorized funds and things, as opposed to this inclusionary housing fund we have, which is kind of a very local thing. So getting the funds into there is going to be a good thing. But in the meantime, while they're in this other inclusionary bucket, the only kind of oversight of that is this board and arguably the planning board. More out of curiosity, it's more this board's authority at this point. So yeah, I think as long as it's in that general direction toward building up a trust, I don't think anyone would be concerned about that.
Do you ever see us getting to a point where we would have free cash transfers into the Affordable Housing Trust?
I think if you had a project that, needed those resources, then people could support that. It's hard to envision the town putting funding for an unspecified purpose. It could be proposed. But I think it would be harder to get the votes, because people would vote for a project or initiative before they would vote just generally to support, something.
But there could be annual contributions from CPC funds. And I don't know, 10%, I don't recall the.
It's about 55,000 a year,
Okay.
at least in the current year.
Okay. And actually, there's nothing that says it will be limited to just.
No, not at all. No, that's
Another,
70% in play. Yeah.
Well, is it 5%? Go to.
Oh, 5%. Yeah, so 65%. Yeah, that's right. And the current balance, but in that inclusionary funds is just shy of 200,000. It's like 199 and some change.
Okay. And the balance in the CPC funds. Or CPA funds. Is for affordable housing. Currently, it's probably quite small because most of that money went to the kitchen and bathroom.
That's correct. That's right. Yeah. So it'd pretty much be this year's 10%. It has. We actually got the second invoice about a week ago. So, yeah. So I don't think it's actually left our bank account yet, but we're currently reviewing the invoice.
But yeah, let's start. I mean, 55,000 a year plus whatever else might seem appropriate to move forward. Something to talk about the public hearing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if we do want to do this, I think we need to appoint the committee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we need people to raise their hands.
Yeah,
I mean, I know a number of people have often indicated.
Well, I have identified all of these 5 people.
Yeah.
So I can ask them to put an application in. Not that other people can't be, considered, but I think it won't be a problem to establish a committee.
Yeah,
That's great.
this probably isn't, I'm not gonna ask you to say, but, we probably we may have each been approached by people who have indicated interest and maybe not the same people, but,
So would we just have those people submit an application and then go to
Yeah.
the next meeting?
I think so. Yeah. What I would suggest is if we take that draft page we put together, we could just, post the charge, retool the text a little bit, just to say, we're working toward a trust. This is anyhow, and then, just publish the page, put it out on Facebook and use it as a call for interested parties. And by that point, they may have already submitted, their letters and then we put it on for the next agenda, get people appointed, sworn in and get them starting to meet.
yeah. Yeah, great. So, so we have 3 weeks till the next meeting. And hopefully that's enough time for people to respond.
So, Adi, what do you think about the makeup of the committee?
I'm listening, but I look at it all. I'm sorry, wait.
Proposed membership of the committee, a member from the select board, a member from the planning board, someone with a financial background experience.
Right, I read that, but what page,
Page 95. No.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's sounds great.
Yeah, I mean, I think the trust would have an expanded membership from that, but I feel like those are the essential pieces to kind of get the ball.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Do we need a motion and a vote on this or?
Yeah, I would think so. You would want to vote to establish a new Affordable Housing Trust Bylaw Committee and vote to adopt the charge as written.
Using the charge that Wendy.
Yep.
That motion sounds just right.
Yeah.
Second.
Okay, so Rick motioned, Wendy seconded. So that's two.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Great. The next topic is closely related, and before you take up a specific request, I think that this is the right vendor, but I do want to, Lee and I exchanged emails today, but we weren't able to connect by phone. I do want to connect with her, whether it's, the Concord-based vendor or some other vendor. The idea is that I'd like to get someone engaged so they can help, this committee. The initial cost, it would take probably a year to spend $10,000. So we might not even need to vote anything. I kind of put this on because, I think the amount, I was looking today at the amount we spent on LDS, and it's under $500 this fiscal year. And the
So
bigger.
most of the work was
most of the-
before the end of last fiscal year.
Correct. Yeah, and that was mostly kind of to get us caught up. And as you remember from last spring, we had a clean bill of health. We were actually in really good shape. The only thing we had not been doing, which we are now, we did this year and we will do annually going forward, is sending the letter each year to the owners of the affordable units, just kind of reminding them of the deed restrictions and those kinds of things. But all the deed restrictions, all the deed riders and all of that was in good shape. Where we're going to most benefit from LDS work is on resale, when we get that notice and we have a certain amount of time to act. So we're going to be in good shape. But this other part of the scope, Lynn said, she didn't really, feel she was the person to do that. So she had suggested we look elsewhere. And there's a couple of vendors out there, the Concord-based one that I outlined, I think would be great, but there's others in the marketplace as well. So,
Well, you ordered somewhere here, or maybe with a conversation that, you know, because this has already been put out,
Yeah,
that we don't necessarily have to do that again. Do you think that we should put it back out again and
it's a matter of kind of urgency versus yeah, I guess, you know what's on my desk.
right, yeah.
It's like there was a clear,
I think the
there is a
probable-
clear path
I
to,
think the
you know.
probable
Yeah.
incremental cost difference,
Yeah.
price difference is
It's,
trivial.
yeah, I don't think it's a price thing. It's about getting the right vendor who's gonna be the right fit for this community.
Yeah,
So, you know, if we get this committee appointed, and if we're content for some period of time before there is an outside resource, they could be appointed and they could review, you know, they could meet with, you know, and they would do it that way. And if they're comfortable, we go forward. If they want to shop around, they can shop around. You know, I will say, you know, drawing up the RFQ, I mean, between me and Leah's time, it was, you know, 4 or 5 drafts back and forth. You know, it just all adds up. That's the thing. And I don't want to lose 10, 12 weeks on a, you know, procurement, you know, it's just like at some point we just gotta kind of go forward. So, but you know, I feel very good about the vendor in Concord. She is one of, you know, her firm's one of 7 on the state of pre-qualified vendors. She's, you know, her references are a number of people that I've worked with over the years who are very highly regarded. You know, the Concord planner and
her hourly rate is much lower.
it's very low. Yeah, it's
$100
very.
an hour, and the other was like 3 something.
It is, yeah, significantly higher. Now, she, you know, she had a legal background and we, you know, we felt it was worth it. But yeah, we didn't make the initial selection based on price. We made it based on who we felt was, you know, she was more LDS, we felt was more clear in the proposal of exactly what we were getting. It gave us a really good, you know, comfort, and we're happy with that decision. So anyhow, what I don't want to get bogged down tonight on which vendor it would be. And we could even table this because we could enter a services contract with a not to, I mean, I could go out tomorrow and engage, you know, what's the firm name? ECR, you know, for a not to exceed $5,000, and that's fine. There's no purchasing issue. And then we'd have some amount of help. You know, my thought was I'm trying to get what's the resource that's going to be kind of holding the hand of and ideally attending the meetings of this, you know, initially this committee and eventually the trust over an initial period of about a year. Because I think that's about how long it'll take before it can kind of stand up on its own. And part of that will be determining what level of support it thinks it needs, whether that's expanded staff hours or a consultant, or whether that's no staff support. I don't know what that, no one knows what that answer is going to be.
Just having somebody available as needed for consulting.
Yeah, I mean, for the kinds of questions that Archie asked, I mean, you know, someone who is an expert on housing trust would be able to answer that question. Whereas I have to either go call legal, which is going to cost, or do my own research, which takes me away from other work I have to do. So, yeah. So it's just so that these questions, because there's going to be 100 of them, you know, don't just come to me and Leah, but someone who's really expert on this. So, you know, I could, like I said, I mean, I could hold off and you know, come back in the future if I think the actual cost will exceed 10,000, because sitting here tonight, it may not, you know, and at those billing rates, it all depends. And, you know, Liz did express she's, you know, she didn't say she wouldn't go to a night meeting, but she did say, you know, with her other commitments of the other night meetings she goes to routinely, she's not interested in like regular night meetings. So that could end up being a real issue if this committee is meeting in the evenings. You know, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, so from that standpoint, it probably makes sense to wait until we have a sense for what the committee is, what the habit of the committee is going to be. And from a timing standpoint, anyway, you know, 10,000 or 10,000 minus 500, if 500 is already been spent. There's a, you know, they probably aren't going to need to begin to consult with somebody, I would think, for a few months. Or do you think it's going to start at the outset, I mean,
I think this, my feeling, I know, I think I said this last meeting, the sooner, I think Leah and I are feeling that the sooner we can get this group connected with a resource, the more neither Leah nor my workload becomes a pinch point
okay,
that prevents someone from going forward. That's my fear, is that, you know, I either become a pinch point or I do what they ask me to do and I fall behind on some other things that they don't know I'm working on, but I got a full plate and, you know, there's a point I have to say no, and it's very, you know, it's just,
yeah.
I don't want to say no. I want to give this group the resources it needs, but it just can't all go across my desk or Leah's
Right.
desk because we're both under strain. So,
It does seem likely that the meetings would end up being night meetings.
Yeah.
right.
So that, you know, that may be a problem for.
Or perhaps weekends.
That's
I don't know,
who's
yeah.
involved.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if this, now that we know a committee is going to be established, if they, you know, and they have a finite period of time and they have defined work, if they could set out their next 6 months of meetings. And then we could say, hey, is that something you could do? Or we could ask multiple vendors. I will tell you, when we sent around this RFQ, you know, between Lee and I, we both worked with a number of different vendors and we contacted a number of people and only 2 responded. And there were people that we thought for sure would respond because we knew it was right in their wheelhouse, but they're so busy because there's a relative handful of qualified vendors in the whole state. And so we only got the 2 responses. So I you know, I don't know that.
So it's questionable whether or not.
I think it's more of a seller's market,
Yeah.
you know.
I mean,
So we just want to table this for now.
Yeah,
That's
I
fine.
just try to
I'm
read
fine
the
with that.
meeting
Yeah.
right now, and something we can do at any meeting. We've already talked about it at pretty good length, so.
Yep. Great.
Okay, and the review of updated draft employee COVID-19 exposure protocols.
And so I think the real question here, unless you had questions on the red line in front of you, is on the use of accrued sick time for people who are either symptomatic or simply self-quarantining under the policy. I think the board's rationale, I think in initially voting back when COVID started that sick time would not be used, made a lot of sense because obviously COVID is, you know, a different thing, and 10 days of sick time a year could be gobbled up in, you know, no time. But even for someone who is not ever positive diagnosed, but is self-quarantining under the town policy, it doesn't seem, you know, it seems to create a disincentive to follow the policy if they're burning up their sick time to stay home. So, but I didn't want to, you know, that's a big deal. And I didn't want to just put out there in writing that, oh, we're not going to count against your sick time, and only to find out that wasn't the board's current posture. So that's why I kind of pumped the brakes on this a little bit.
Yeah, well, you know, my guidance is that we should continue with that. You know, continue with what we've done previously, which is not to require them to go through sick time. But at the same time, we need to be, you know, fairly clear about, you know, working from home. You know, assuming that you're capable, you know, somebody's capable of it, you know. bringing a laptop home, bringing what they need home to be able to continue to work from home, particularly if it's up warranty. Occurs to me though, that, question is how do we make sure that they have what they need? Not everybody brings a laptop home every night. Angus, I think pretty much everybody has a laptop available, is that correct?
Department heads.
Yeah.
But not every staff person.
Yeah.
But everybody would have the ability to log into their email remotely, assuming they had a personal computer, which not everyone would, but they can call in and check their voicemail remotely.
Yeah.
But yeah, department heads are able to work, pretty much seamlessly remotely at this point. That's been the case pretty much right throughout.
Yeah, I'm noticing on the second to last paragraph on page 123, the last sentence, as if the employee is too ill to work and accrued sick time has been depleted. So that creates a little bit of.
That's exactly where I got hung up. Yeah.
And so I think what I was trying to get across was, they'll work from home, but if they're too sick, I mean, is that when they would use sick time or, so that's another question to be answered.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's a very, back when COVID first hit, sick time wasn't going to be used because but it was a whole different world. Like Archie said, earlier tonight, like it was, no one knew where it was going. It was brand new out of nowhere. And so I think the board was trying to be very supportive and recognize that if someone gets COVID, 10 days sick time a year could go by in a snap.
Yeah. I guess that holds true even now. So that maybe that last sentence should just be revised. I mean, I think the intent is for employees to work, but like you said, if they don't have a laptop or their work cannot be completed from home easily, something for DPW, for example, they shouldn't be penalized. I mean, maybe that last sentence can just be struck.
I don't know. What does that last sentence mean?
Well, what I'm saying is I think that's confusing the issue. I think it should be struck. If our decision is that people should not have to use sick time for quarantine or if they have COVID, then that last sentence shouldn't be there.
Yeah, I don't really see that.
I kind of get, I don't think this is gonna be. We don't have thousands of employees, so this might apply to one person or something. I don't think it, I don't think we did that.
I don't think, I don't. It doesn't.
So are the red line changes based on comment or feedback that?
Yep. Yeah, we got a couple of comments back from different staff, and that's what those changes are.
So do we need to vote on that? Are you looking for a decision from the board?
Yeah, basically, because it's any deviation from the personnel policy, I would bring to the board. And so normally if someone's out sick, you're going to use their sick time. So if we're not going to for COVID specifically and not other illnesses, it would be great to have a vote to that effect. And I think it's something, if you do vote that, I think to look at it periodically.
Yeah.
So it's not like in 2024
Yeah,
that someone's like, oh, hey.
yeah, no, it's funny too, 'cause I was gonna say, should there be a time on
Yeah.
this, you know, should-
Well, and when you guys voted it back in March of 2020, you'd said that we'd look at it periodically.
Yeah, I mean, at
Yeah.
that point, COVID was just gonna be like a couple of weeks,
Yeah, yeah.
remember?
Yes, I do.
2 weeks to flatten the curve and we'll go back to normal. Haven't heard that flatten the curve lately.
So it keeps going up and down.
Exactly.
It's more of a
Pretty
That was literally, everything was gonna be fine in 2 weeks.
roller coaster than a curve. So I mean, one thing you might do is just to keep it real simple, at the end of that first sentence of that same section, compensation during that time off, is if you added right at the end, we're paid for their normal work schedule, comma, and, accrued leave and time away will not count against accrued sick leave, something like that. I think that covers both the, someone's sick and someone
Yeah.
quarantining.
So just strike that last sentence. And-
And to strike the last
I mean,
sentence, right?
I hadn't thought of this before, but should someone have to show that they actually had a positive test or, like,
Yeah, I think that's required in the beginning.
who they show that?
Well,
I mean, just saying you have, I have COVID.
Oh, you want like physical proof, like,
You see what I mean? Like, I don't know, maybe I'm being too cynical, but
In practice, we have had, not that long ago, we had an employee who was out in precautionary because of potential close contact, got tested, came back negative, offered to provide the test. We said, no, that's fine. Just, it's just one more health-related document that, but I mean, you certainly could require it. I think that might be a case-by-case thing. But, I'm just saying in practice, we haven't.
Like, done it like 3 times, maybe you start thinking that this might not be the real thing.
So you could have, there could be a sense in there that says there may be requested that you provide proof of positive test
or proof of negatives.
or proof of negative.
It doesn't have to be, but it may.
Yeah, so it may be required, yeah.
But everyone is in my office, it goes, someone goes somewhere, everyone calls, brings me their tests, negative tests.
So did we want to have a discussion about who this applies to, whether it's all town employees or just town officers?
Yeah, because, could be a situation where somebody who works outside of the building. is affected, right, and outside is affected.
But I think when it was, and Wendy, I know you did the first draft, so I don't want to, presume to know, I mean, I think the thought was kind of this building, which would certainly include people whose routine work takes them into this building. So for instance, the custodian, for example, isn't stationed in this building, but he's in here every day. So I would think it would definitely include, just for example, that position, but perhaps not, like a water, laborer who's out, and it really isn't coming into the bill. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud, but I think the intent was for this building, because in parallel, the library was coming up with its own protocols for that building.
Well, I think that the library wanted to use the same policy.
Mhm.
So,
But yeah, I can see for a water department at the DPW that it might be different because most of the employees work independently or relatively independently, and they're outside most of the time.
and also not coming in contact with the public.
Right.
Yeah, so maybe this policy would just apply to people that routinely work in town.
I think that's what we've kind of envisioned.
And
So
the
I think-
library, so I mean.
Yeah.
Because I do think Karen is interested in having the same
Mhm.
policy cover them.
Mhm. But I think their board would, vote that, right? So I could send her whatever we finalize, and then they could, adopt the same thing with their library board. So maybe similar to what we said with the last policy, we put an applicability sentence, and it would apply to workers or to employees whose workstation is within the town office, or whose regular work schedule includes work within the town office building, something like that.
Trees
Word of the day. You guys comfortable with that?
Okay.
Can you just read it the way?
Well, so the applicability would be employees, in the town offices and whose work includes, regular work in the town offices. I would come up with something a little bit more articulate than that, but that's the gist of it.
Covering.
And then, but the other revisions we talked about were to strike the last sentence of the second last section, to add the clause "and will not draw from the employee's accrued sick time," and then to add in the prior section under quarantine, proof of negative test may be required.
I think just so we don't forget it, let's pick a date and then have the sunset clause.
That's a good idea.
6 months.
June
June
30th.
30th.
Yeah.
So Angus, if we just vote to approve this, does that cover the not using sick time, or do you want a separate vote?
I think that definitely covers it. Yeah.
We can do it without.
Wait, why is this vote 2-0?
Well, from this angle, I was looking at that clock, it looked like it said 11 o'clock.
This feels like it.
Okay. You ready?
I forgot it.
Oh, okay, all right, I move that we, is it okay if I still?
Yes.
Okay, I move that we adopt the updated employee COVID-19 exposure protocol as amended in draft and packet with additional amendments as discussed. What's the last 15 minutes?
Second.
Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
The date and time for annual holiday tree lighting.
All right, traditionally, this has taken place on the Thursday after Thanksgiving. which would be December 2nd. And I believe it's been at 6 p.m. And that's been when the, DPW is, they put the lights up ahead of time, but that's when they flip the switch to turn them on. And former select board member Kemper had been, he and his family had always brought the carols and the hot chocolate and cookies. And in consultation with Chairman Parker, I reached out to Glenn and he said he'd be very happy to continue to do that this year. So if the board's amenable to that, the question is to set the date and time so we can start to publicize that. But I don't know if people have been in the past, but it's it's a lot of fun. It's pretty low key. It's like 30 minutes total. It's if we did want to do something different, if any board members wanted to give remarks or something, you could certainly do that. But in the past, it's just really been carols and hot chocolate and cookies and lights. So.
And so that's December 2nd, what time?
Well, it's whatever you say it is, but traditionally it's been the Thursday after Thanksgiving. Yeah, so that would be December 2nd. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the Thursday
Yes,
after.
and 6:30 is historical women's day.
Yeah.
We got a better time?
No.
No. Sounds.
But I think that's better, if people want to bring their kids, it's easier for them to get. 6 might be a little tight, so.
So what were you saying, 7 or 6:30?
6:30.
6:30, yeah.
Okay. We need to vote.
Why do we need to vote?
I don't think you need to.
It's an action by the board. You need to vote.
What's the action?
That you're
We're not
setting
lighting the
you're
trees.
setting the date and time for the event.
By acclamation. So. Great. Okay, next one. I wanted to just kind of start the discussion on the budget. It's coming right up. Obviously, we got a lot of work ahead of us. So I wanted to kind of outline. This is somewhat modified from prior couple of years, but it's the same general sequence. The main change from prior years is typically we've looked at the board's adoption of its policy direction as the formal kickoff, but because of that, typically if you look at like last year's budgets weren't due to my office until early January by department heads and like mid-January by boards and commissions. And it didn't really give us enough time between getting all of that and, actually presenting the budget to have much back and forth. We had some with some of the larger departments, but there wasn't as much time as we would have liked. So I know Stephanie and I would like to get, have people submit their budget sooner so that we have a little more time to put it all together, more than just the, keying in the numbers, but more of that back and forth. So that, that's what we set out is if you guys are in general agreement with that, when we meet with department heads next Monday, and we have scheduled a department head meeting for that purpose, we would set out a calendar that would call for initial submittal of department budgets ahead of the holidays. So for December 22nd, with an extra 3 weeks allowed for boards, commissions, and committees to acknowledge that, some of them, might want to review that in meetings. Some of them don't. I mean, it runs the gamut, but we do typically have consistently set that date a few weeks later to allow that time if it's needed.
So how, some of the boards and committees meet like the 3rd week of the month?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we put in the footnote, let's see, is there a footnote? I think it says, if the timeline's not achievable for any specific board or commission, just contact the town manager no later than January 3rd. We would make that a little more prominent. I mean, right now it's buried in the fine print, but yeah, we always make that allowance. The main thing is we want to make sure our pipeline is full. So if there's a couple of, there's a couple of stragglers, it's really no problem. The issue is getting enough in soon enough that we can start to really chew on those with a emphasis on the bigger departments. Or the bigger budget departments. So yeah, if there's a specific issue for any board or committee, as long as we get it, well enough ahead. I mean, if it's the open space committee and it's the same $750 that they ask for every year, it doesn't take a lot of time.
Yeah.
It's the bigger departments that we spend the most amount of time on. And as I said in this footnote, water is always later, and that's fine. And I give them a ton of breathing room because I know there's a lot of moving parts and it's not tied into the operating budget. So let's say the board sets a target of bottom line growth not to exceed X. Water is different. Whereas, if you set that and like police or DPW is late, that really creates a real problem because, it all feeds down to the bottom line, but with water, it is independent. So they've always been given a little more time.
I think the library, the board of trustees, that's the day after their normal meeting.
Mhm.
So I guess that.
Well, I mean, if they got a budget package before Thanksgiving, and they'd have December and, and if they needed to meet in January too, that's fine. There's definitely a little bit of slack in here. We just wanted to give ourselves more breathing room than we've had in the past.
Yeah, this looks reasonable.
I will say, in terms of the town meeting date, we're going to assume it's April 25th until you tell us otherwise. I think if you do look ahead and you think it's going to end up being outdoors and therefore not a Monday night, I think if you make that decision, not tonight, but in December, that's going to be good for everybody to know really what the date is and work backwards from that. Because everything kind of ties to that. The FinCom booklet, the capital process, everything's linked to that.
Reserve the bill.
Well, that's, yeah.
Before they even start season.
I'm serious.
Yeah, you're right. No, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I was in touch with Brad on that and I forget the exact answer, but basically their sports start soon. Spring soccer typically starts last week of March with games usually starting the first or second weekend of April. So.
Yeah, so it was April 25th was the Tuesday.
No, that's Monday. Yeah, that's a Monday. Yeah.
And, so April 23rd would be the Saturday before.
Mhm. I would like to see it a little later,
Yeah.
actually,
Okay.
for two reasons. For one thing, better chance of weather, but also it gives a little more breathing room for the whole process.
Sure.
Um,
How much later? Is a week?
Like mid-May,
So then that's after.
like second or third. Well, but yeah, there's that point too, the election. Yeah, that is a little bit.
Prefer not to have a town meeting right before an election. But that's
No,
just
yeah,
me.
no, it wouldn't be right before the election. Yeah.
Like 3 day,
No, you wouldn't,
Sounds
you wouldn't want
not
that.
perfect.
You wouldn't want that. So the election will be May 2nd. That's absolute. So, whether it was like Saturday the 7th, Saturday the 14th, or Saturday the 21st, I think any one of those, I mean, it's whatever you guys said is what we'll do. But I think any of those dates are going to conflict with youth sports.
Yeah.
But if that decision's made in December, that's 6 months ahead of time. And it at least gives people more time to adjust.
So maybe we should set it in January. The date.
Or sooner, yeah.
Yeah, sooner. Okay. Maybe not tonight, but if not tonight, then fine. seems to be.
Yeah.
I guess I'm uncomfortable with having, I know we've done it before now, but I'm still uncomfortable with the.
Have the election first, yeah.
I was uncomfortable with another outdoor.
Yeah.
I mean,
You think we used up every
we're
lot?
3 for 3 and.
Actually, 4 for 4.
Outside 4 times?
Spring
Yeah, that's right.
2020, fall 2020, spring 2021.
Fall 2020.
Okay.
So Archie, would,
That you thought it was less.
so would you favor sticking with the April 25th, but looking at maybe like a Pentucket Auditorium type venue? If based on COVID, the annex isn't practical?
So that's a Monday?
Mhm.
Well, I mean, again, that's a long time from now. I would-
Maybe we can pick an outside date, then and inside and then mention.
Basically, I don't know, I guess I'm being optimistic that the
No more COVID.
no more COVID, yeah, I am.
I think a lot of people got vaccinated today.
Well, I'll tell you what we'll do is we're going to assume it's going to be April 25th. And then any change from that, as long as it's later and not earlier, is going to be fine. Because we can definitely, I mean, that's the same calendar we've been on every year.
Yeah,
So,
it does seem likely that most people there'll still be outliers who have not had any vaccine. But most people at that point will have probably had not just the first and second dose, whatever dose it was of their vaccine choice, but they'll probably also had a booster. And it does seem as though we'll be approaching that point where I don't know if it'll be no more COVID, but there'll be such a high rate of vaccination.
Well, and also, but even people that haven't been vaccinated, that have been infected, they've got some immunity too. And certainly when the fire runs out of fuel. Yeah.
It's a new variant.
What was that?
Unless
The
there's
new variant, yeah.
new variant. Always do it outside on a Monday night.
so generally, this is a generally reasonable calendar.
Yeah,
I think so.
Great,
Yeah.
good. So, and then the policy direction, you guys will put your own stamp on that, but I included last year's just as a sample. So I think, and like I said in the footnote here, that'll definitely be a prominent topic on the December 6th meeting. But if that does carry to December 20th, I don't see that being a problem. If we were holding off on sending the budget package around, that would crunch things.
Yeah.
But basically, I think I kind of like this, that we start the process, get departments budgets and yeah, so we'll talk about that at the next meeting.
Yeah, so we have the budget goals, the budget policy. Which I guess we should plan to do that, to determine what they are at our next meeting. So that would be, this was December 14th last year. How's that?
It's a little, it's December 14th last year. So if you do it on the 6th or you do it on the 20th, it's right. No, it's typically the first meeting in December.
it's not, we have to do this. This is where the charge is.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, it's in the legislation.
So, yeah, I mean, I've been involved with this the last 2 years. And I guess, you know, we can sort of work from the format that we have here and each take it through and come to the next meeting with thoughts on
Yeah,
changes. Yeah, okay. I don't recall how we did it before, so you know, how we arrived at
probably deal with
it. Go like, we have whatever our chief wanted.
Yes.
All right, ready for item M?
Yeah.
So, you know, I think the memo, we had a call or Zoom meeting today with Lynn and Sharon. And basically the path we're going to follow is exactly as I outlined. I've asked Lynn to put together a fee proposal of what it would take for her firm to be involved with basically helping to prepare a proposal toward either disposition, whether by sale or long-term lease. Knowing, by the way, and for anyone listening, that decision has not been made, but to support the board so that if you do want to offer that option to the voters in the spring, that you have the technical assistance to actually put that together. And, you know, she was real clear when I spoke to her about two weeks ago that she felt the majority of the effort in her estimation would be the legal work. And that her firm
What
would.
does that mean?
Like drafting the actual preservation restriction. You know, it's kind of like a conservation restriction. It's a lengthy, you know, document with a lot of verbiage. So that's, you know, and she was clear, she doesn't do that. So that's why I reached out to KP is, she said, you know, the attorney would have a lot of work to do. She would have some work to do, partly on helping everybody to understand what's feasible, what's the right level of detail to put in these procurement documents that's specific enough that you know you're getting what you want, but not so specific that you're tying the hands of whoever might consider bidding on it. One of the interesting things that came out of so what's going to happen is Lynn's going to put together kind of a fee proposal and kind of a level of effort of what she thinks it would take her. And she's going to specify in that what she would be relying on others to do, specifically the attorneys. And then KP will look at that and give their own kind of level of effort, you know, rough cost estimate of what they think it would take. And I said, if we don't think we have the budget to do that, we might think this is a great idea, but we might not be able to start it until we get an appropriation. But I don't know if we're talking about, you know, $4,000 to $6,000 or $14,000 to $16,000 or some other amount. I don't have any idea. So until we have some idea what the kind of order of magnitude cost is, we don't know if we can find the money or not. We might be able to find the money and we might not. So that's how they're going to proceed. One of the interesting things that came out of today's Zoom, Sharon said, you know, she said, would the town's intent be to basically grant funds to whomever, you know, if you went this disposition route, to grant funds to whomever is selected, whether to purchase it or for a long-term lease, that the town would also put money into the deal. And I said, well, you know, we haven't really thought about that. She said that is customary in other towns, especially for something that if there's not that injection of funding, you may or may not find anybody who wants to do it. So it's something that's,
does that though tie the hands of whoever's going forward?
Because they're now using public money.
Right.
You know, I didn't even think to ask that question. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. But anyhow, so I told them if there's examples of other towns that have done that, would be interested to learn where that's been done, under what circumstances, because that would significantly complicate what is already going to be a pretty complicated process.
Right.
I mean, you can only imagine putting together a CPC proposal when you don't even know who the private party is going to be. I mean, that would be very challenging.
So I had planned to raise this at the CPC meeting on Thursday night for administrative funds. You want me to hold off on that?
I mean, I think we should definitely brief the committee on what the board's thinking about. I think it would be premature to ask for an authorization of funds because we don't have any
Right,
idea.
so
Yeah,
you had said
no,
before, it was
I did-
difficult to want to broach the idea.
yeah, no, I definitely think we should, we should definitely make them aware that this is something we're at least exploring. And if we get a fee proposal and it's within something that could be supported with admin funds, it's not out of the question that, a request would be submitted for that.
So what would be, I mean, I was curious to see how much of the admin funds have been turned back to the general fund each year. Is that something fairly easy to
Yeah.
produce?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I can tell you in round numbers, if you figure 10% this year, and it's different, a little different every year, but it was about 55,000. So 5% would be about 27,000. And the total budgeted wage for the admin, if that person works the full budgeted hours, is less than half of that amount. So there is, call it between probably 12 and 14 or more per year that it's basically unencumbered. And the only kind of routine expenses are, there's the funding for the Community Preservation Coalition. There's the funding for the legal ad for this Thursday's hearing, which was, I think, $240, something like that. Office supplies. So there is, 5 figures of funding that's not spoken for.
Boy, I would hope it doesn't cost more than that.
You wouldn't. Well, so one of the questions, and we'll learn more about this, if you guys, speak directly with Lynn or with Sharon, is one of the questions that came up today is, do you, at the time that you're seeking town meeting vote, do you have the preservation restriction already drafted? Or do you have like, I forget the term that Lynn used, but basically like preservation guidelines that would be applicable in an RFP process? Because if town meeting authorized the disposition, that would obviously go through a 30B procurement process. And so tied to that would be certain preservation guidelines that would be customary. To actually have like a full 30-page preservation restriction drafted before you even get a town meeting vote would not be customary.
Yeah.
And that would be, and Sharon was clear, that's like a much higher level of effort. And, I said, the voters are going to want it if they're.
It's also a lot more money, which might not, it might just go
Right.
down the drain.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I think what Lynn is more, accustomed to is that there'd be, clearly written preservation guidelines that would be applicable in the procurement process would be used to determine if, someone's responsive and whether you're going to award them the bid. And then in that subsequent contracting process, just kind of like when we buy conservation lands, you don't draft you don't have the CR drafted by the time you get the town meeting vote. That all happens afterwards, because that is a bigger expense.
That's good enough.
So I think where this is just kind of a new concept for all of us, I think we're just needing to learn, how, what's customary elsewhere. I think obviously the voters would want to have some clear sense that they're going to get what they think they're going to get. And if that could be accomplished with preservation guidelines that are binding in the procurement process, that's probably the right answer. So we'll have more on that once, as we get, I think in the next couple of weeks I think we'll have something from Lynn on that.
So you had a meeting today with,
We did. Yep. Wayne and I had a Zoom with the TEC, which I guess is really the go-to firm on Safe Routes to Schools grants. By their own estimation, they've done about 90% of the Safe Routes to Schools work in the state. And if they're even close to that, that's quite a lot of expertise. Wayne and I had, a couple of questions, and we're going to respond with some written comments later this week. And one of those will be to bulk up the public meetings a bit, because they're just putting in 2, and it could be more than that. They were really clear that like daytime meetings, back and forth correspondence, they're not billing by the hour, like all of that's great. And so I said, so as I get comments, I can just forward them to you. Like as they come in, they said, great, that's perfect, that's what we want. They're just, they said that the evening meetings, that it's a big expense to prepare for, and the big slides. And so, but I do think in our response, we're gonna, want to see some language to say, where it says 1, it could be 1 to 2, it could be 1 to 2, because we don't want to get boxed into where we feel like we're at the end of our budget. We have to make a decision. No one wants to feel that way. So, and we've emphasized from day one that the public process is enormously important on this. So I know we will have some comments. We'll get back to them on this. And I also wanted to hear what you guys had to say so that we can get any comments back. I do feel very comfortable going with this firm. I just want to make sure that we have a scope that's going to cover us. And another thing that's going to change from what you see is we talked about the importance of doing traffic counts at a time that's representative, and that because they were initially suggesting do the traffic counts and the pedestrian counts in like early in the scope, but obviously there's no programmed activity on the ball fields until next spring.
Yeah.
And so, in talking it through, and this is where Wayne's expertise with traffic engineering is so helpful. He was saying like doing the traffic counts in like April is probably going to be a lot better. So they're more representative, and it is a little bit of a cart before the horse, because you're not actually doing the counts until relatively later in the conceptual design process. It's got to be done by the end of June. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's all relatively small volumes when you consider the type of projects a firm like this is working on. It's not really driven by volume as much as the fact that these movements do take place, even if there aren't a lot of them numerically. The goal is to have safe crossings this way and so forth. So they thought it would not be problematic at all. And in fact, they totally agreed that, no one wants to do these counts and have someone go out there with 48 hours and traffic counter and then go into a public meeting and have the first thing someone says is be like, what are you doing your traffic counts in December? Like there's no ball field. You kind of have to do it when there's activity. So I think there will be some changes to what you see, but generally this outlines what is proposed. And we also clarified in the call that while it refers to one conceptual layout, that's the preferred layout. There would be multiple concepts reviewed during the public process that would then arrive at the preferred layout, which would be worked out in more detail.
So they can do a fair amount of their work before, any sort of site measurement, site assessment, with the exception of traffic counts can be done whenever they want to start.
Yeah.
Would it be possible to have one of the public meetings be remote? I mean, would that cut down the expense of them having, would that make it?
Yeah, definitely.
So is this kind of their boilerplate proposal, or did you or Wayne draft a scope that they're responding to?
So we had sent them the background. I think this is fairly boilerplate for them. Yeah, we'd sent them all the background documents and the various memos we'd sent to the state, which, you know, I think do a nice job of outlining the specific concerns of this location. But I think this scope is pretty boilerplate.
It's actually does show 2 meetings here.
Yeah, but it has just 2, you know, it has exactly 2 instead of. But we've really emphasized the number of constituent groups and, you know, the involvement of the school, obviously. I was a little bit leery of the lump sum aspect of the proposal. Wayne said he actually prefers that because he doesn't want to feel like every time he's picking up the phone that the, you know, is gobbling up budget. But it definitely makes it incumbent on us to make sure we get our money's worth, you know, and we would also specify, Wayne and I talked about this after we wrapped up with them, is we would want to specify the, you know, what's the billing process in terms of like percentage complete or different milestones, just to make sure there's, you know, we have a good transparency on the work that's getting done.
I guess what we get in the state's money's worth.
Right. You know, and the goal is to, you know, position ourselves for more grant money.
I think the fact that they've done so many of these makes me more comfortable with the lump sum. I mean, they must have exactly what some costs.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, they, you know, I asked them, like, is this going to result in the level of design that's going to be competitive for a Safe Routes to Schools grant? And they said that the Safe Routes to Schools grant cover all the engineering, which a lot of grants don't. So that's something they knew that, you know, I didn't know that. I know often with, especially on a state highway, if you're not at 25% design, as far as the state's concerned, you don't have a project. So, but I guess that doesn't really apply with Safe Routes to Schools because they cover the soft costs.
There was a vision for another meeting, you know, a virtual meeting where.
Well, I think the language Wayne was going to suggest is that, you know, something saying, you know, where it specifies 1, it could be 1 to 2, just so we don't get into a meeting and people feel like they have to make a decision.
Yeah.
So rather than specifying where it would be, where an extra meeting would go, just to have clear accommodation that it could be more than the 2 that they've specified. And that wouldn't be like a change order.
Okay, well, this looks good. So what do we need to do with this at this point?
Nothing, unless there was specific input that you had on the draft scope. You know, we'll get our comments back to them this week and probably have a signed agreement within, you know, a couple of, you know, two to 3 weeks. And then we can really get things started with, you know, a public announcement. And, you know, we talked about setting up like a, you know, a project page and, you know, doing as much solicitation of people's input, you know, through the website, social media and things as we can. That's why I asked the question about, could I just send them comments? Like, let's say we do a post on Facebook and we get 25 or 30 comments. Can we just ship those over right along as they come in? And they said, yeah, that's great. That's what they want us to do. So.
Right. Good. Okay. All reading assignments, placing them for future agendas.
I have a request.
Yeah.
I'd like an update in quite a while, how we're doing budget wise and all that kind of stuff.
meeting tomorrow night, so, I mean, I can report back to the next meeting.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, that might even have, budgetary implications, if, you know, if things are looking good, maybe, spend as much money as we need to, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's been right along where, like, say, at 50% project completion and only 20% of the contingency fund has been spent, so it seems like we're in good shape out there. The numbers.
Okay.
So if we get to the end and, you know, 40% or 50% of the contingency being still there, are there, how does that work? Are there things that have been, I know, you know, there's a lot of value engineering done. Would things be added back in, or?
It depends on if there's 3 different.
Because it's bonded, because the money's already there, so there isn't like.
Is it bonded 100% to the total?
I believe it is. Yeah, Greg LeBrecq had to make that decision, and because, yeah, in fact,
We don't have to talk about this now. That's what I want to talk about.
no, I think they did borrow the full amount, and if they end up, because he had to decide, do they do it 2 big tranches and then a third relatively small tranche, like $2 million or something, or do they just get it all in the second? And they decided to get it all. And if they end up with money that is borrowed but then not needed, that would basically be a windfall proportional to each of the 3 communities that would be usable, but only for a school-related capital need. And so he had talked to me and Carol. And
so it couldn't go back to, say, repaying the balance.
No, but it would be eligible, for instance, for like a paid school project. That's the way Greg had described it. I think it was maybe last spring or it was a while back that he asked me and Carol, and I forget if they still had the interim person at Groveland at the time, but he had asked, like, what did we think he should do? And he felt, you know, he should just borrow it all, because even if that happens, it would be, you know, each of the towns has so many capital needs in the schools that the funds could be put to good use. So that was my recollection.
So they must have somehow left flexibility in the bond, so that it could be applied elsewhere. So unused funds could be applied. So. I'm sure they thought that through. I'm also serious. Okay. I think we're done.
Okay.
We'll adjourn.
Second.
In favor? Aye.
Thanks. 10:37.